Imagine walking into a room and not caring what anyone thinks of you, not because you're rude, but because you're grounded, calm, focused, sure of who you are. Imagine speaking your truth without fear, standing your ground without guilt, and living your life without needing anyone to clap for you. But let me ask you this. How many times have you changed your words just to be liked? How often have you said yes when you wanted to say no, just to avoid disappointing someone? The truth is, seeking approval is like drinking salt water. It feels good for a moment, but it only makes you thirstier. And while you're busy chasing smiles and praise, you're slowly giving away your power, piece by piece. Today, you're going to learn how to stop doing that. You're going to learn how to replace the hunger for approval with the quiet strength of self-respect. These aren't just ideas, they are Stoic principles, timeless tools that helped warriors, philosophers, and emperors stay grounded no matter who was watching. So get ready, because after this video, you'll no longer need applause to feel worthy. You'll be walking through life like someone who doesn't beg for respect, but commands it. Before we begin, make a decision. Write in the comments, I choose respect over approval. You're not just typing words, you're building a new mindset. The more you say it, the more it becomes your reality. Write it now, and let's begin. They say freedom is the ability to choose your own path. But what if your thoughts aren't really yours? What if the way you speak, dress, act, and even think is shaped not by your own values, but by a quiet need to be accepted? It's not always loud. It doesn't always feel wrong. That's what makes it dangerous. We grow up learning to care what people think. Praise feels like sunshine. Disapproval stings like a slap. So we adapt. We adjust. We shape ourselves to fit the room, hoping not to offend, not to be judged, not to be cast out. Over time, the lines blur. What was once a choice becomes a habit. What started as connection becomes dependency. And one day, without realizing it, we trade our self-respect for a pat on the back. Epictetus, a former slave turned Stoic teacher, warned about this form of invisible slavery. He didn't speak of chains or prisons. He spoke of minds trapped by approval, of people who looked free on the outside, but were completely controlled on the inside. And he was right. The deepest kind of slavery is the one you don't even notice. When you constantly seek approval, you begin to live someone else's life. Your decisions stop coming from what's right. They come from what's popular. You don't speak up unless it's safe. You don't say no unless it won't upset anyone. You don't chase your own dreams. You wait for permission. It's subtle. It's silent. But it eats away at your soul. Let's break this down. Approval is addictive because it gives quick reward. It feels good to be liked, to be seen, to be told you matter. The brain lights up, your heart lifts. But here's the catch. The more you depend on it, the less control you have over your own sense of worth. It's no longer, I did something good. It's, they said I'm good, so I must be. And that shift? That's where the chains begin to form. Think of how many choices people make, not based on values, but based on fear of judgment. Think of the clothes you wear, the things you post online, the career you picked, the way you avoid conflict, the opinions you silence, not because they're false, but because they might upset someone. This is how the world tames people without ever raising a hand. When you shape yourself to fit everyone else's expectations, you slowly lose the shape of who you are. You smile when you're uncomfortable. You agree when you're unsure. You nod while swallowing your truth. Not because you're weak, but because approval has become your safety net, and anything that threatens it feels dangerous. But here's the hard truth. The more you chase being liked, the more you give people power over you. Power to affect your peace, power to change your mood, power to define your worth. They don't even need to say anything. A look, a pause, a comment can shake you. You might think you're in control, but deep down, you've placed your emotional well-being in their hands. That's not freedom. That's being a puppet. What Epictetus taught was this: real freedom starts when you take your worth back from the crowd, when you stop tying your value to how others see you, when you stop asking the world, "Am I good enough?" and start answering it yourself. He taught that you cannot control what others think, but you can always control what you choose to believe. And that choice, that's where strength begins. But it's not easy. Approval isn't just about compliments. It's tied to our survival. We're social creatures. We want to belong. But the need to belong becomes toxic when we're willing to betray ourselves for it. When you ignore your gut just to avoid tension, when you bury your opinion just to stay in the group, when you pretend to be something you're not just to keep someone's smile, that's not connection, that's self-erasure. Here's what's worse. Approval seeking never ends. You get it once and you want it again. You say the right thing, they praise you, and now you're trapped. Next time, you feel pressure to keep it up. You create a version of yourself they approve of, and now you have to protect it. Even if it's not real, even if it's exhausting, even if it means lying to yourself, you've built a mask, and now you're terrified of what happens if it slips. So you become careful, calculated. You think twice before you speak. You hide parts of yourself. You water down your truth. Slowly, day by day, you abandon your inner compass for 1,000 outside maps, none of which lead to peace. And ironically, the more approval you chase, the less respect you earn. People can feel when you're not grounded, when you bend too easily, when your words change with the wind. Approval seeking looks like safety, but it often comes off as insecurity. Confidence, true confidence, is rare, and it starts when you no longer need to prove anything. The Stoics knew this. They taught that dignity doesn't come from being loved. It comes from living with virtue, from doing what's right, even if no one notices, from saying what you believe, even when it's uncomfortable, from standing tall, not because the crowd cheers, but because your values are rooted deep. Let's look at the emotional cost of approval addiction. Every time you hold back your truth, you lose a little respect for yourself. You feel it, that quiet guilt, that internal conflict. It grows. You begin to wonder, who am I really? You second guess. You feel tired, not physically, but mentally, because pretending is exhausting. People think burnout comes from work. Sometimes it comes from wearing a mask for too long. And let's be honest, approval doesn't even guarantee peace. You can do everything right. Be kind, be generous, be supportive, and someone, somewhere, will still disapprove. You can't win. So why try? Why exhaust yourself trying to please people who still might not accept you? Isn't it more honest, more liberating to just be yourself? Not everyone will like you. That's not a flaw. That's reality. Some people will misunderstand you. Some will judge you unfairly. Some will walk away. That's okay, because the ones who matter will stay, not because you perform for them, but because they respect who you truly are. And here's the best part. When you stop needing approval, the respect you do get becomes real, not based on your mask, but based on your character. There's a reason why the strongest people speak less, why the most respected leaders don't shout, why the most grounded individuals don't explain themselves constantly. They don't need to. Their worth isn't on trial. They know what they stand for. And that's silence, that's stillness, that's power. You want to command respect? Start here. Stop needing it. You're not here to be liked by everyone. You're here to live in truth, to live with virtue, to live with clarity, to become someone your future self would be proud of, not because the crowd clapped, but because you stood firm when it mattered. And standing firm doesn't mean being rude. It means being rooted. It means saying yes because you want to, not because you're scared to say no. It means setting boundaries not to punish, but to protect your peace. It means speaking honestly, even if your voice shakes, because silence would be a betrayal. Here's something to remember. When you seek approval, you give others the pen to write your story. But when you stop, you take the pen back. You write from truth, from strength, from freedom. And that's the kind of life that commands quiet, lasting respect. So next time you feel that pull, the urge to please, to be liked, to fit in, pause, breathe, and ask yourself, am I doing this out of alignment or out of fear? If it's fear, walk away. You owe no one your truth but yourself. And if someone can't respect your honesty, your boundaries, your values, they were never offering real respect to begin with. You don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to prove to be worthy. You don't need permission to be yourself. You were born enough. You've just forgotten it under layers of applause. Now it's time to remember, not by being louder, but by being still, not by performing, but by living with principle, not by chasing hands to clap, but by building a life you can stand behind, even in silence. The world may never give you the respect you crave, but that doesn't matter, because the moment you stop needing it is the moment you begin to command it. But let's be honest, recognizing the trap of approval is only half the fight. Walking away from it leaves a space. And if you don't fill that space with something stronger, something grounded, you'll drift right back into the same habits. The applause fades, the silence creeps in, and your mind begins to wonder, what now? That's where integrity comes in, because when you stop living to be liked, you need something else to guide your decisions. You can't live in a vacuum. Nature hates a void, and so does the human spirit. Without a clear compass, you'll default back to what's familiar, nodding to keep the peace, softening the truth, reshaping yourself for acceptance. The only way to escape the pull is to replace it with something unshakable. That something is a code, not a rule book full of rigid demands, not a list of how to behave so others still respect you, but a code of values that you choose consciously, that you build, test, refine, and live by, whether anyone's watching or not. Because real respect, lasting, grounded, untouchable respect, is never built on charm. It's not a product of being liked. It's born from consistency, from congruence, from living in such a way that your words, your choices, and your values all match. And that starts with letting go of likability. Likability is slippery. It changes depending on the room you're in. What wins you applause in one place might cost you everything in another. Try pleasing everyone, and you end up pleasing no one, least of all yourself. You bend, you twist, you shift, until there's no version of you left that feels real. That's why integrity is the only true anchor. It means acting in line with your values, not for praise, but because it's who you are. It's making a decision that might cost you approval, but leaves you with self-respect. It's being able to look in the mirror and know, I didn't sell myself short today. That level of clarity, it radiates. People sense it. Even if they disagree with you, they can't help but respect it. Because it's rare, because it's real. Think about the people you truly respect, not the ones you like, not the ones who make you laugh, but the ones who impress you with the way they carry themselves. It's never because they always agree with you. It's because they stand for something. They don't shift with the wind. You know where they stand, and that makes you trust them. Trust doesn't come from likability. It comes from knowing someone won't pretend just to win your approval. That if they say something, they mean it. That if they commit, they follow through. This doesn't always make them popular, but it makes them strong, and that strength draws people in. When you build your life on integrity, you create a stable platform, not only for others to see, but for you to stand on. You stop second-guessing. You stop performing. You don't have to carry the burden of keeping everyone happy. You just follow your values and let the chips fall where they may. And that doesn't mean becoming cold or rigid. Integrity isn't about never changing. It's about knowing why you're changing. It's not about being stubborn. It's about being intentional. You can evolve, grow, listen, learn, but you do it on purpose, not out of pressure. Without integrity, everything becomes a performance. Every word is filtered. Every decision is weighed not against what's right, but what's liked. You don't speak from conviction. You speak from calculation. That kind of life erodes the soul, slowly, quietly, but completely. Integrity gives you freedom. Freedom to say no without guilt. Freedom to walk away without resentment. Freedom to disagree without hostility. Because you're not reacting. You're responding from your core. That's power. The kind of power no title, no audience, no social media platform can ever give you. So how do you build that kind of integrity? First, you have to define your values clearly. Not what you should value, not what others expect you to say, but what actually matters to you. What you're willing to fight for, what you refuse to compromise. Write it down, clarify it, challenge it. Because until your values are clear, your integrity has no foundation. Then, align your actions with those values, especially when it's uncomfortable. That's where the real strength is built. It's easy to live with integrity when everyone's watching, when the reward is visible. The test is in the moments when no one will know. When choosing your values means losing comfort, losing status, losing approval. That's the fire where true character is forged. And yes, there will be moments of doubt. You'll feel the tension. You'll wonder if it's worth it. You'll see others gain faster by taking shortcuts, by people-pleasing, by doing what's expected instead of what's right. Don't be fooled by speed. Integrity is a long game, but it's the only one that lasts. You'll also need to become brutally honest with yourself. Not harsh, not judgmental, just clear. Where are you bending? Where are you pretending? What compromises have you made in silence? What parts of yourself have you hidden just to fit in? It takes courage to face those answers, but that courage is the birthplace of strength. Start with small things. Say what you mean, even in casual conversations. Show up on time if you said you would. Follow through on small promises. Speak kindly when it's hard. Set boundaries when it's easier not to. Each of these builds muscle. Over time, your code of integrity becomes second nature. It becomes who you are, not just something you do. And here's the surprising part. When you stop chasing likability, you often become more likable. Not because you're trying, but because authenticity is magnetic. People crave it. In a world full of masks, The one who speaks with clarity stands out. But even if you're not liked, you won't care in the same way, because your peace won't depend on applause. Your confidence won't need constant confirmation. You won't need to prove anything, explain everything, or win every conversation. You'll be free. This is the quiet strength the Stoics lived by. They didn't shape themselves to match the crowd. They didn't perform for praise. They lived by their principles. And when those principles cost them popularity, or even their lives, they stood firm. That wasn't ego. It was integrity. Musonius Rufus, for example, didn't water down his beliefs to be liked by emperors. He spoke the truth, knowing it could cost him. Cato the Younger chose to die rather than live under tyranny because his principles were not for sale. Their names have outlived kings because respect built on values doesn't fade. You're not here to impress. You're here to live well. That doesn't mean every day will be easy. Living with integrity takes effort. It's tempting to bend when it's easier, to hide when it's safer. But the discomfort of honesty is always better than the comfort of pretending, because the more you live by your values, the less anxiety you carry. You don't have to remember which version of yourself you showed. You don't have to edit your story. You don't have to chase the shifting wind of opinion. You just show up as you are, and the right people will see it. Let go of the need to be liked. It's a moving target you'll never hit. Anchor yourself to something deeper, something that doesn't depend on applause. Build your character like a foundation, solid, unseen, but holding up everything you do. When you live from that place, your words carry more weight. Your silence has more power. Your presence commands respect. Not because you ask for it, but because you've earned it. And if some people walk away because you chose integrity over approval, let them. You're not losing them. You're losing the version of you that needed their validation. What you gain is better, a life you can stand behind, one choice at a time, one truth at a time, one honest step at a time. Respect isn't something you chase, it's something you become. Once you begin to build a life around integrity instead of approval, something surprising starts to happen. You feel stronger, clearer. But even then, there's still a quiet voice that creeps in when things get difficult, a whisper that says, "What if they reject you?" Even when your actions are grounded in truth, that fear doesn't always disappear. You may stop needing applause, but the fear of judgment still lingers. It hides in silence, in hesitation, in those brief seconds before you say what you really think. That fear can paralyze. It can make you doubt yourself when you're actually on the right path. So, how do you stop that fear from owning you? How do you face rejection without shrinking, without losing the strength you've worked so hard to build? The answer is not to ignore it, but to face it, on purpose. The Stoics practiced something few people talk about today. They called it premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. But this wasn't some dark obsession with negativity. It was clarity, it was courage. It was the conscious decision to prepare the mind for adversity before it shows up. And when it comes to the fear of disapproval, this practice is a quiet weapon, sharp, steady, and transformative. Negative visualization means taking a moment each day to ask, what's the worst that could happen? But not in a careless or sarcastic way. You're not catastrophizing, you're training. You're building the strength to remain calm in the face of discomfort because you've already met it in your mind. This technique helps you step outside the emotional storm. It lets you look fear in the eye before it catches you off guard. Most people walk through life terrified of being judged, not because rejection is unbearable, but because they've never thought it through. The fear stays abstract, foggy, heavy, and anything that feels unknown feels overwhelming. But when you sit down and say, "What if I speak up and they disapprove? What if I lose their praise? What if I get criticized, misunderstood, disliked?" Suddenly the fear has shape. It's not a monster hiding in the dark anymore. It's something real, and real things can be handled. The beauty of this exercise is that you realize most rejection doesn't destroy you. You've survived it before. You've had someone not respond to your message. You've had someone roll their eyes at your opinion. You've had people talk behind your back, and yet you're still here. What hurts isn't always the event itself. It's the fear of the event. And when you run from that fear, it grows. When you face it directly, it shrinks. That's why negative visualization works. It breaks the illusion that rejection is the end of the world. And it does something more. It trains you to build courage not from comfort, but from preparation. Think of it like armor. A soldier doesn't wait until battle to build resilience. They train in the cold. They run in the mud. They rehearse worst-case scenarios so that when the real moment comes, they're not shocked. They're ready. The same applies here. You don't wait for a tough conversation to prepare your mind. You prepare it in the quiet moments. You don't wait for someone to disapprove before you ground yourself. You do it daily by facing those small fears in your imagination. And each time you do, you soften the emotional impact of future pain. The mind becomes familiar with discomfort. It doesn't panic as quickly. It doesn't beg for safety. Instead, it says, "I've been here. I've already made peace with this possibility. Let's keep moving." This level of calm is rare. It's the kind of presence that others notice without you trying. Not because you're louder, but because you're steady. Not because you have all the answers, but because you've rehearsed the worst and refused to be shaken by it. And this doesn't just apply to social rejection, it works in all areas of life. But when it comes to disapproval, it's especially powerful, because most people live under an invisible rule. Avoid being disliked at all costs. That rule governs their speech, their choices, even their dreams. But what if you removed that rule? What if instead your rule became, disapproval is not a threat, it's a teacher? Suddenly you're free to take risks. You're free to share ideas without watering them down. You're free to pursue your goals without needing every step to be accepted by the crowd. Some will misunderstand you. Some will misjudge you. That's not a failure. It's reality. People bring their own filters to everything you say. You can't control that. But you can control how you respond. And the best way to respond with clarity is to prepare yourself before the moment arrives. This is not about becoming numb. It's about becoming resilient. There's a difference. Numbness is avoidance. Resilience is readiness. You still feel the sting, but it doesn't stop you. You feel the tension, but it doesn't break you. Negative visualization builds that, one step at a time. It also helps you develop humility. When you visualize things going wrong, when you imagine being ignored, dismissed, laughed at, you begin to see how little you actually control. That realization doesn't make you weak. It makes you wise. It reminds you to act with courage, not with entitlement. To focus on your effort, not on the response. To commit to your principles, even when they come at a cost. And this practice isn't just for the mind. It changes your posture, your tone, your presence. People feel when someone isn't afraid to be disliked. It creates a quiet confidence that can't be faked, because that person isn't walking on eggshells. They're grounded in clarity. You don't owe the world perfection. You owe it presence. And presence comes when your fear of judgment no longer controls your choices. When you start applying this exercise, don't rush it. Begin small. Visualize one potential rejection per day, a conversation that might not go well, a message that might get ignored, a decision someone might criticize. Sit with it, walk through it in your mind. Ask yourself, what would I do if this happened? How would I respond with strength, with grace, with clarity? Then move one step further. Visualize how you'll stay aligned with your values, even if that rejection comes. Because that's the real goal. Not to avoid discomfort, but to act with integrity in the face of it. Over time, your tolerance expands. Things that once scared you begin to feel smaller. You stop avoiding tension. You stop chasing comfort. You start doing what matters. Not because it's easy, but because it's right. And here's the unexpected gift. The more you prepare for rejection, the more confident you become in your ability to handle it. That confidence leaks into everything. You don't need to over-explain anymore. You don't need to soften your truth. You don't need to shrink to avoid attention. You begin to walk differently, speak differently, lead differently. Because when rejection loses its power over you, the world loses its grip. You start to see yourself more clearly. You realize your value doesn't drop when someone disagrees. Your worth isn't at risk when someone walks away. The core of who you are becomes stable, not perfect, not invincible, but grounded. And this grounded self becomes your anchor. It doesn't get tossed by every opinion. It doesn't flinch at every comment. It moves forward, not recklessly, but with quiet determination. That's the power of preparation, of visualization, of choosing to look fear in the face before it knocks on your door. So don't wait until you're tested to build your strength. Build it now, while things are calm, while you have space to think clearly. Prepare yourself, not for suffering, but for freedom. Because when you're no longer controlled by the fear of being disliked, you become free to live with truth. And that freedom, it's louder than approval, stronger than applause, and worth more than any praise you'll ever receive. Once rejection no longer scares you, something deeper starts to rise to the surface. Not just strength, but questions. Questions about who you've been trying to be, about how much of your life was lived for others, about whether the version of you the world knows is even real. That discomfort you feel, that sense that something doesn't quite match anymore, that's not weakness. It's the beginning of truth. Because once you stop chasing approval, what's left behind is what's real. And for many, that real self has been buried under years of performance, roles you played to be accepted, behaviors you learned to be loved, masks you wore because silence felt safer than honesty. But now, those layers start to crack. That's the next battle, letting go of the persona. The persona isn't necessarily fake, it's just not the whole truth. It's a version of you crafted for others, the polished, filtered, socially acceptable mask you've been conditioned to maintain. Sometimes it looks confident, sometimes it looks agreeable, sometimes it even looks admirable. But it's not essence, it's ego. Ego is not just arrogance, it's not loud pride. Often it hides in the form of protection, the need to look competent, to appear certain, to never be vulnerable. Ego builds walls, not to keep people out, but to keep shame hidden. It says, don't let them see your doubt, don't show your cracks, don't admit you're still figuring it out. And so you become the expert, the achiever, the one who always has it together. You play the part, and the world rewards it. you get praise, you get recognition, you get acceptance. But deep down, it starts to feel hollow, because the self being admired isn't fully you. The Stoics didn't chase ego. They weren't interested in status games. They valued essence. What's true, what's virtuous, what endures. Not the title you hold, not the mask you wear, but the person you become when there's no one left to impress. Essence is quiet. It's rooted in character. It's built on things that don't need to be seen: courage, honesty, discipline, humility. These aren't qualities you perform, they're qualities you live. Not for applause, but because they make you whole. To live from essence, you have to stop performing. That means letting go of the version of yourself that was designed to survive the world. The identity you created to fit in, the traits you amplified because they made people like you, the beliefs you held because they earned approval. It means telling the truth, even if it contradicts the image people expect from you. That's hard, because ego says, protect the brand. It says, don't disappoint them. But every time you maintain a false identity, you shrink a little inside. You might be winning outside, but you're eroding the inside. Letting go of the performance persona doesn't mean destroying yourself. It means removing what was never truly you. The exaggerations, the pretenses, the overcorrections, the constant need to be perceived in a certain way. You're not here to be an image, you're here to be a soul, and that requires honesty with yourself first. Because ego will always find ways to justify itself. It will say, you have to be this way. It will convince you that people wouldn't accept the real you, that you'll lose everything if you let the mask slip. But those are lies fueled by fear, not truth. The truth is that what's real in you can't be destroyed. You don't lose anything by dropping what's false. You gain presence. You gain alignment. You gain peace. Think about how exhausting it is to maintain a false front, always thinking about how you're being seen, always adjusting, always performing. That tension in your chest, that overthinking, that anxiety. It's not just pressure, it's misalignment. The mind knows when the self is being betrayed, and it sounds the alarm through stress. Living from essence quiets that alarm. You no longer have to manage perception. You just show up, fully. And not everyone will like that. Not everyone will understand it. But that's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to truth, not to applause. Essence isn't always exciting. It doesn't need to be. It's stable. It's consistent. It's not reactive. It's intentional. And it's enough. It doesn't try to dominate or impress. It just is. And that's what makes it powerful. To get there, you have to spend time with yourself, not the version of you that's curated for others, but the one that exists in silence. Ask hard questions. What part of your identity is built on approval? What parts feel forced? Where are you still pretending? And then go further. What values matter to you when no one's watching? What makes you proud of yourself, not in public, but in private? What kind of life would you live if no one had an opinion about it? These aren't easy questions. They peel back layers. They remove the noise, but they lead you to what's true. And once you start to live from that place, something changes. You no longer need to dominate conversations to feel heard. You no longer seek validation in titles or recognition. You no longer define yourself by your resume, your achievements, or your image. You define yourself by your alignment, by your consistency, by your courage to be unpolished and real. You start speaking less, but saying more. You start showing up differently, not to impress, but to serve. You stop reacting emotionally to criticism because it no longer threatens your identity. You're not fragile, you're grounded. Ego is loud because it's insecure. Essence is quiet because it's whole. And wholeness can't be faked, it can only be lived. This doesn't mean you never care about your impact. Stoicism never taught indifference, it taught internal control. You still care, you still aim to live well. But your actions are no longer shaped by the craving to be seen a certain way. You act from principle. You speak with clarity. You show up with presence. And when people don't respond the way you hoped, you don't collapse. Because your worth wasn't hanging in the balance. It was already intact. That's the real shift, from performing to being. And being is the hardest thing to fake. When you stop building your life around image, you free yourself from a heavy burden. You stop negotiating your self-worth. You stop filtering every action through the lens of, how will this look? You stop hiding. And what you find in that rawness is something the world desperately needs. Authenticity, not perfection, not performative humility, not carefully crafted vulnerability, just honesty, clarity, essence. You'll know when you're getting closer to it. Your body will feel lighter. Your choices will feel cleaner. You won't feel like you're carrying a version of yourself that needs to be constantly adjusted. You'll be able to rest, not in laziness, but in alignment. That peace, that strength, it's what approval could never give you, and from there, everything changes. You start to create from the heart, not from expectation. You start to serve without needing to be noticed. You start to lead without needing to control. You start to love without needing to be someone else. And slowly, the world around you shifts too. Because when you show up as you are, not better, not worse, just real, you give others permission to do the same. That's not just personal growth, that's impact, but it starts with surrender. Not giving up, but letting go. Letting go of the image, letting go of the act, letting go of the story that says you have to be more than who you are. You're already enough, but you won't feel it until you stop performing. The essence you've been looking for doesn't need to be built, it just needs to be uncovered. And once it is, you'll realize that the version of you the world was waiting for was the one you buried beneath the mask. When the masks fall away and you begin to live from essence, you enter a quieter space, a place where truth echoes louder than praise. But that quiet doesn't mean peace at every turn. Something else now steps into view: rejection. Not as the thing you once feared, but as the next force you must face. Because the moment you stop pretending, the world responds, and not everyone will applaud. This is where growth sharpens. Rejection doesn't disappear just because you've chosen to live honestly. In fact, it often increases. When you no longer adapt yourself to make others comfortable, some people pull away. They resist the change. They question it. They criticize it. That sting you feel, it's real, but it doesn't have to weaken you. It can be used. It can be refined. The Stoics didn't see disapproval as failure. They saw it as information. They trained their minds to receive criticism without collapse. Not by hardening, not by pretending it didn't matter, but by using it. They turned external friction into internal focus. They didn't confuse judgment with truth, but they also didn't reject it blindly. They used every challenge as a mirror. When someone disapproves of you, it reveals more than their opinion. It reveals your reaction. That reaction is where self-mastery begins. Ask yourself, what is this feeling showing me about myself? Is it pride? Is it insecurity? Is it a need to control perception? Is it the remains of a false identity still trying to survive? Criticism becomes a tool when you stop defending and start reflecting. Not all feedback is useful. Not all rejection is rooted in reality. But all of it can be examined, and that examination reveals what needs to grow. This doesn't mean you accept every insult as fact. It means you use every trigger as a teacher, even the unfair ones, especially the unfair ones, because how you respond in those moments tells you more about your inner world than calm days ever could. Most people either crumble under rejection or reject the rejecter. But mastery exists in the space between. You don't absorb everything like a sponge, nor do you block everything like a wall. You listen, assess, apply, or release. That's wisdom. That's control. That's strength without ego. And this is where something unexpected begins to happen. Rejection becomes refining fire. It burns away the extra. It strips you of illusions. It reveals where your identity still depends on being seen a certain way. Every disapproving glance, every cold silence, every sharp word, it becomes part of your training. It teaches patience, because not every truth will be welcomed. It teaches resilience, because not every effort will be recognized. It teaches grace, because not every critic needs to be fought. And most of all, it teaches clarity, because each time you face rejection and remain grounded, your roots grow deeper. You stop flinching at disapproval. You stop needing to be understood before you act. You stop explaining every decision, justifying every feeling, bending your path for temporary validation. Disapproval sharpens the edge between who you are and who you thought you needed to be. It reveals the gap between performance and purpose. It turns your focus inward, not in isolation, but in responsibility. You begin to notice the difference between feedback that helps and feedback that harms. But even harmful words can show you something. They show you where you're still vulnerable to outside definition. They show you where you're still seeking acceptance through external reflection. Use those moments. When you feel the sting, sit with it. Ask yourself why it hurts. What part of you is still tied to being seen as right? What image is being threatened? That discomfort, when faced honestly, is pure fuel. It burns off pride. It exposes your ego. It reveals the parts of you that still need strength. This is not about becoming emotionless. It's about becoming emotionally aware. You can feel the pain without collapsing into it. You can be hurt without being broken. You can be humbled without being humiliated. And over time, this changes your relationship with rejection. You no longer avoid it. You welcome what it shows. You stop chasing safe spaces. You walk directly into the places where you're tested, not for approval, but for refinement. Some people will misunderstand you. That's not a problem to fix. That's a condition of being true. Their disapproval may be loud, but your integrity can be louder, quietly, steadily, consistently. And that consistency is what builds respect. Not just from others, but from yourself. Because rejection stops being about them. It becomes about who you choose to be in response. Do you stay rooted? Do you hold your values? Do you act with dignity when it costs you something? The world often rewards what is popular, not what is principled. So if you're building your life around values, expect resistance. But let that resistance build your depth. Let it make your actions sharper. Let it purify your intentions. Not all criticism is wrong. Some of it will reveal your blind spots. That's a gift. Accept it without defensiveness. Let it help you see more clearly. not from a place of shame, but from a desire to evolve. Other times, the criticism will be empty, shallow, designed to provoke. That's a test, not of your worth, but of your control. You don't have to fight every voice. You don't have to prove yourself to every eye. You don't have to defend your every step. Let go of that noise. Stay aligned with your deeper compass. And if the world misunderstands, so be it. Your job is not to fix their lens. Your job is to walk your path. Over time, you'll begin to appreciate rejection. It removes what doesn't belong. It reveals what needs strengthening. It tests your principles in real life, not in theory, not in comfort, but in tension, which is where virtue becomes real. Without resistance, growth becomes soft. Without pressure, your values stay untested. Without challenge, your confidence stays fragile. So let rejection come. Let criticism arrive. Don't run from it. Let it do its work. Because every time you face disapproval and choose character over comfort, you forge something rare, a self that doesn't need defending. You start to move through the world not afraid of being disliked, but committed to being honest. Not obsessed with your reputation, but grounded in your reality. Not driven by acceptance, but led by intention. And that shift changes everything, because now even rejection becomes useful. It sharpens you, it humbles you, it teaches you what applause never could. It turns your weaknesses into awareness, your pride into precision, your discomfort into strength. That is self-mastery, not perfection, not performance, but the quiet commitment to growth, no matter how the world responds. Rejection won't end, but your relationship with it will transform. From fear to fire, from threat to teacher, from weakness to wisdom. Once you begin to treat rejection as refinement, something shifts in your relationship with the world. You no longer fear criticism, and you no longer need applause. But even as you grow stronger, the weight of constant performance still lingers in the background. The pressure to fit in, to keep playing along, to show up in ways that feel forced. This is where many get stuck, not because they lack clarity, but because they don't yet know how to step away without disconnecting completely. There's a different kind of strength required here. One that chooses detachment, not out of bitterness or pride, but out of wisdom. One that allows you to remain in the world without being ruled by it. One that lets you live among others without selling yourself to be accepted. That strength is what the Stoics would call inner freedom, and it starts with the rare but powerful decision to opt out. This doesn't mean withdrawing from people. It doesn't mean turning cold or becoming superior. It means stepping out of the invisible contracts that keep you chasing approval. The subtle agreements that say you must keep up appearances, that you should nod when you disagree, that you must explain yourself to be accepted. The moment you stop trying to win at those games, you stop losing your peace. People-pleasing is one of the most exhausting forms of self-abandonment. It's quiet, polite, and praised by society, but it leaves you drained. It starts with small things, saying yes when you mean no, smiling when you feel unseen, changing your voice, your tone, your truth, just to avoid discomfort. Over time, it becomes a pattern. You start to think your worth depends on keeping everyone happy. But no one stays happy for long, and now you're chasing a moving target at the cost of your own self. The opt-out principle doesn't mean walking away from connection. It means walking away from performance. You still care, but you stop shaping yourself around the need to be approved of. You remain kind, but not at the cost of your truth. You stay involved, but not at the expense of your center. It's the art of detaching from outcomes while remaining rooted in integrity. That balance is rare. Most people either over-engage or disconnect completely, but the Stoic path is neither. It's not about rejecting society. It's about refusing to be shaped by it when it pulls you away from virtue. That means you can attend the gathering without pretending. You can speak your truth without apology. You can care about others without being owned by their opinions. It begins by noticing where you've been seeking approval under the mask of kindness. Ask yourself, are your choices driven by compassion or by fear? Are you helping because it aligns with your values or because you're afraid of being disliked? This level of honesty reveals the difference between genuine connection and quiet self-erasure. When you detach, you make peace with not being everyone's solution. You stop managing others' emotions like they're your responsibility. You stop apologizing for your boundaries. You let go of the pressure to rescue others from their discomfort. You stop performing and start living. But detachment is not numbness. It's awareness without entanglement. It allows you to care without controlling, to love without losing yourself, to engage without attachment to being seen a certain way. That clarity sharpens your presence. You're no longer drained by overthinking. You're no longer weighed down by the need to constantly adjust. You move through your life with focus, not friction. And when others sense you've opted out of the game, they may react. Some may pull away. Some may question your change. Some may even accuse you of being cold. But what they're really feeling is the absence of your compliance. The space where you used to bend is now firm. The version of you that lived to make them comfortable no longer exists. Let that be okay. You're not here to be a mirror for other people's expectations. You're not here to be shaped by opinions that change with every season. Your duty is not to keep everyone pleased. Your duty is to live from truth, even when that truth makes others uncomfortable. The more you detach from approval, the more you reclaim your time, energy, and mental space. You stop obsessing over how you were perceived in a conversation. You stop replaying moments in your mind, wondering if you said the right thing. You stop carrying guilt for things that were never your burden. And in that space, something beautiful starts to grow. Clarity. You begin to know what you actually think, not what you were taught to think. You know what you value, not what you were told to value. You know what matters, not because the world says so, but because your inner compass has become loud enough to lead. But clarity isn't enough. You must also have the courage to act on it. That's where detachment strengthens. It shows up when you choose rest over proving your productivity. When you speak honestly without softening your words just to protect someone else's comfort. When you stay rooted while others push you to bend. That courage isn't loud. It doesn't always look like confrontation. Often it looks like silence, stillness, walking away, holding your ground. Not because you want to win, but because you're no longer available for the games that cost your soul. You can still love deeply, still serve others, still be present. But now you're doing it from fullness, not obligation, from clarity, not confusion, from purpose, not pressure. You begin to understand that not everything deserves your energy. Not every opinion deserves your explanation. Not every request deserves your agreement. You become intentional with your yes, honest with your no, and calm in the face of disappointment. That calm isn't indifference, it's maturity. And it's hard-won, because detachment doesn't come naturally in a world built on reaction. It takes discipline to observe without absorbing, to stay kind without becoming compliant, to remain open without becoming porous. But it's possible, and it begins by accepting that your life is not a group project, that peace doesn't come from being liked, that freedom begins the moment you no longer need others to be okay with your choices. And this isn't about becoming unreachable, it's about becoming untouchable by manipulation. You don't need to explain your worth, you don't need to justify your space, you don't need to convince others that your path is valid. You've chosen it. That's enough. The Stoics didn't teach withdrawal. They taught presence without dependence. They walked through the world with intention. And when that world tried to shape them with praise or punishment, they responded not with defense, but with detachment. Not from life, but from ego, from games, from the need to be seen a certain way. That is the path forward, not to run, not to isolate, but to opt out of the noise, to choose clarity over confusion, stillness over reactivity, purpose over performance, and in doing so to live, not as a reflection of what others want, but as the embodiment of what is true. Letting go of people-pleasing and detaching from the need to be seen a certain way gives you something priceless: space. Not the kind of space that makes you distant, but the kind that lets you see yourself clearly. But clarity alone is not enough. You might know what matters, you might know what you stand for, but now you must prove it, not to others, but to yourself. And that kind of proof doesn't come through comfort. It comes through discomfort, voluntarily chosen, deliberately faced, consistently embraced. Most people seek ease. It's the default mode of modern life. We avoid anything that feels hard, cold, unfamiliar, or uncertain. But strength doesn't grow in comfort. Character doesn't form in safety. Discipline doesn't sharpen in warmth. And respect, real, grounded respect, doesn't come from how well you perform. It comes from what you're willing to endure when no one is watching. The Stoics understood this deeply. They practiced discomfort on purpose, not because they enjoyed suffering, but because they knew that only through controlled hardship could they train the mind to be steady, sharp, and independent. They fasted when they had food. They exposed themselves to cold, to solitude, to hunger, to physical exertion, not out of punishment, but out of preparation. They saw voluntary discomfort as a mirror. It showed them what they were made of. It stripped away excuses. It built silent strength. You earn respect through action, not intention. People feel the weight of someone who has suffered voluntarily and grown from it. Not the loud kind of suffering that demands attention, but the quiet kind. The kind that's done in solitude, without recognition and without complaint. That depth becomes visible in your presence. It's the calm in your tone, the steadiness in your eye contact, the way you speak only when needed and walk with unshakable clarity. Voluntary discomfort puts you back in touch with parts of yourself that modern life has dulled. When everything is convenient, your mind grows soft. When everything is instant, your patience shrinks. When everything is curated to please, your tolerance for challenge dies. You lose your edge. You might not notice it in daily life, but you'll feel it the moment something real goes wrong. You'll see how unprepared you are for stress, for failure, for pressure. But you don't have to wait for crisis. You can build strength now. By choosing things that are slightly uncomfortable, not because they're trendy or extreme, but because they give you something discipline never grows without resistance. Fasting teaches restraint. It reminds you that not every desire needs to be answered, that your body doesn't control your choices, that your cravings don't own you. It teaches you that you can feel hunger and not panic. You can sit with discomfort and remain composed. That mindset carries into every other part of life. If you can sit with hunger, you can sit with emotional tension. If you can wait for food, you can wait for results. You learn to delay gratification. You become more measured, more controlled, more grounded. Cold exposure teaches you how to meet shock without fleeing. When you step into cold water, your instinct is to flinch, to tense, to resist. But over time, you learn to breathe through it, to relax, even while everything in your body says, escape. That teaches you how to stay calm in pressure, how to meet anxiety with stillness, how to stop reacting and start observing. You begin to realize that most panic is mental, not physical, that survival is built on composure. Solitude teaches you how to be with yourself without distraction. Most people fill every quiet moment with noise, music, screens, voices, notifications. They're terrified of what they'll hear in silence. But when you sit alone, without escape, the truth comes up. You face what you've been avoiding, your regrets, your fears, your unresolved tension. And when you don't run from it, you begin to master it. You become someone who doesn't need to be entertained to be at peace. Discomfort strips away your false identities. It reveals your real limits and then pushes them gently, steadily, with discipline. You begin to notice how many things you once avoided that now feel manageable. You become less reactive, more deliberate, less emotional, more observant. You start to crave challenge, not because you enjoy suffering, but because you respect what it builds. And that self-respect creates an aura. People may not know your story, but they'll feel something different. They'll feel that you don't flinch in stress, that you don't crumble under pressure, that you're not looking for shortcuts or easy praise. They'll sense the quiet authority that comes from inner training. This isn't about extremes. You don't need to live in the mountains or walk on coals. It's about small, consistent practices that sharpen your mind. Waking up early when you want to sleep. Finishing what you said you'd do even when it's boring. Choosing the difficult conversation instead of avoiding it. Holding silence when it would be easier to speak. Voluntary discomfort also teaches humility. You begin to see that your struggles are not special, that everyone suffers in their own way, that pain is part of life, and facing it doesn't make you heroic, it makes you human. That humility keeps you honest, it keeps you grounded, it makes your strength relatable, not arrogant. People respect what they sense is real, and what's real is someone who has gone through fire, not once in crisis, but regularly, by choice. Someone who can sit with tension without needing to escape. Someone who can delay what's easy for what's meaningful. Someone who knows how to lose and still walk forward without losing themselves. You don't need to speak about your discipline. It shows. In how you hold eye contact. In how you don't overpromise. In how you don't explain yourself to seek pity. In how you stay calm when others panic. Every small discomfort you face adds to this, not because suffering is noble, but because comfort alone cannot build strength. And without strength, respect becomes a performance. People might like you, they might even admire you, but respect only deepens when you've walked through pain and kept your integrity intact. Voluntary discomfort sharpens your gratitude. When you've gone without, you appreciate more. When you've chosen hard things, you don't feel entitled. You recognize that ease is temporary and you treat it with care. That attitude creates presence. You're not chasing what's next. You're aware of what's here. You also stop fearing discomfort in other areas. You no longer hesitate to face conflict. You no longer freeze when you receive criticism. You don't need to avoid awkwardness or tension. You've already trained in those spaces, and now they feel familiar. Not comfortable, but manageable. And that's the goal. Not to be fearless, but to be unshaken. Discomfort teaches you to lead yourself. Before you ask anyone to trust your words, you show them how you live. Before you offer advice, you demonstrate discipline. Before you expect commitment, you model resilience. That's how respect is earned, not through demand, but through example. This way of living is not loud. It doesn't seek applause. It doesn't explain itself. It simply acts, quietly, steadily, without needing permission. And those who witness it, even briefly, walk away with more than admiration. They walk away with respect, not just for you, but for the standard you live by. That standard, built in discomfort, sustained in silence, tested through tension, is the foundation of self-respect. And it echoes louder than any words you could speak. Once you begin to strengthen yourself through discomfort, you realize how much noise you used to tolerate. You become more aware of the subtle ways comfort has been used to keep you numb, compliant, and distracted. You've built resilience by walking into the cold, into silence, into effort. But now you have to turn inward and face a more slippery kind of dependency, one that looks harmless, one that often disguises itself as encouragement, as love, as connection. But beneath it, there's a craving, and that craving is approval. It doesn't knock on your door loudly. It slips in through small habits. A glance at your phone to check likes, a pause before posting something honest, a need to be reassured, validated, applauded. You tell yourself it's normal, but just because something is common doesn't make it healthy. Approval is addictive, not metaphorically, biologically. When you receive praise, your brain releases dopamine, the same chemical triggered by drugs, gambling, and sugar. It gives you a temporary high. You feel seen, valued, significant. The problem isn't the praise itself. The problem is what happens next. You want more. You start adjusting your behavior to get it again. You stop being guided by truth and start being led by feedback. You lose clarity. You lose control. And because the reward is fast and public, it becomes easy to chase, especially on social media. You post, you wait, you check, you compare, you refresh. You don't even notice you're being trained. Every click, every like, every comment becomes a microdose of approval. Your identity starts to stretch toward what is received well and shrink away from what isn't. It starts early. From childhood, we're taught to perform for approval. Smile for the camera. Say what adults want to hear. Be polite even when you feel disrespected. Fit in. Do well. Get the gold star. That pattern embeds itself deep into your system. You learn to depend on the outside world to tell you who you are. The Stoics warned against this dependence. They taught that anything you can lose is not truly yours. If your sense of self rises and falls with the opinion of others, then it's not grounded, it's borrowed. You're not living, you're reacting. You're not acting with virtue, you're adjusting for applause. Detoxing from approval begins with awareness. Start by noticing how often your actions are influenced by the possibility of being seen. How often do you do something just because it will be appreciated? How often do you stay silent because it won't be? How often do you wait for affirmation before moving forward? This detox isn't about becoming indifferent or disconnected. It's about becoming free. You have to reclaim your autonomy from the reward system that's been built around you. That means being willing to feel discomfort. Not the kind that sharpens your body, but the kind that tests your ego. The kind that comes when you post something honest and no one responds, when you speak your truth and people walk away, when you do the right thing and it's met with silence. That silence is your teacher. It forces you to ask, would I still do this if no one noticed? Would I still speak this way, act this way, live this way, if there was no audience? The detox also involves removing triggers. That doesn't mean abandoning technology or deleting everything. It means using tools instead of being used by them. It means setting limits, not checking your phone first thing in the morning, not measuring your worth by your followers, not seeking validation from strangers while neglecting your own sense of alignment. You build internal strength by turning inward for feedback, not from a place of ego, but from virtue. Ask yourself, am I acting with courage, justice, self-control, and wisdom? If so, that's enough. If not, no amount of praise can compensate. Let your principles be your mirror, not the opinions of the crowd. The withdrawal from approval can be intense. You may feel lonely, unseen, doubtful. That's because for a long time you outsourced your confidence. Now you're being asked to source it from within. That takes time, but it's the only path to real confidence, one that doesn't vanish the moment applause fades. You will begin to notice how approval culture shapes even the smallest decisions. The angle of a photo, the phrasing of a sentence, the timing of a post, the subtle edit to your opinion so it's more palatable. These aren't small things. They're breadcrumbs that lead you away from yourself. Cutting this pattern means facing the truth. You may be less popular. You may lose followers. You may disappoint people. But what you gain is unshakable self-respect, the kind that doesn't need to be broadcasted, the kind that survives silence. Approval addiction also affects how you handle failure. When your worth is tied to outcome, you avoid trying unless you're sure you'll succeed. You play safe. You choose tasks where you're guaranteed praise. That limits your growth. A Stoic mindset flips this. It honors effort over applause, process over performance, intention over reaction. You begin to measure your life by how aligned you are, not by how admired you are. That kind of measurement can't be gamed. It's not subject to trends. It's not swayed by compliments or criticism. It's built on deep self-audit, a kind of private integrity that no one can see but you. As you let go of approval, you also stop needing to over-explain. You realize that not every action requires defense. Not every choice needs validation. You free yourself from the loop of anticipating reactions. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head. You do what's right and let others respond however they will. That response is theirs to manage, not yours. You'll also find that as you pull away from approval, your creativity sharpens. You no longer create for applause. You create because it's in you to create. You speak because it's in you to speak. You lead because it's in you to lead. Not to be impressive, but to be useful. That shift is liberating, and others will feel it. Because truth carries a different weight than performance. In the end, detoxing from approval is not about shutting yourself off from connection. It's about choosing which kind of connection matters. One rooted in truth. One based on mutual respect. One that doesn't require you to shrink, edit, or pretend. Approval may feel good, but it's not peace. It's noise. And the moment you begin to let go of it, you begin to hear something deeper. The voice that's always been there, quiet, steady, clear. That voice isn't asking for attention, it's asking for alignment. When you stop living for approval, you begin to see clearly who you were trying to impress. And once you no longer need to be seen, a new kind of freedom appears. But with that freedom comes a deeper challenge, understanding the difference between being good and being seen as good. In a world obsessed with image, where even virtue is marketed, the temptation to perform morality is everywhere. You can live ethically and still lose yourself by needing everyone to notice. This is the tension between virtue signaling and silent strength. One seeks applause, the other seeks alignment. It's easy to display values. It's harder to live them quietly, consistently, when no one's watching. Stoicism teaches us that character is not built in public posts or statements made to fit trends. It's shaped in private choices, small decisions, and how we treat others when no one will reward us for it. A Stoic doesn't ask, "What will they think of me if I do this?" They ask, "Is this in line with the kind of person I claim to be?" Virtue signaling is performance. It speaks in slogans. It posts filtered opinions that are popular in the moment. It often says the right things, but stops there. It doesn't demand personal change. It's about maintaining the right appearance. The message isn't always false, but the motive is usually external. Silent strength, on the other hand, is quiet action. It doesn't explain itself. It doesn't broadcast its values. It just lives them. You won't see it trending. You won't find it shouting, but you will feel its impact in how people listen when it speaks, in how it leads without needing recognition, in how it chooses principle over popularity without flinching. The difference comes down to motive. One asks, "How will this make me look?" The other asks, "Who am I becoming by doing this?" The first is driven by the audience. The second is driven by conscience. Virtue that demands to be seen becomes hollow, because once the need to be known overrides the need to be true, the core begins to rot. Even when the words are noble, they lack power. People might be impressed for a moment, but that kind of respect doesn't last. It's built on signals, not substance. Silent strength builds slowly. It doesn't rush. It doesn't need to be ahead of others. It's content being unknown as long as it remains grounded. That's because its purpose is internal transformation, not external validation. It's not trying to prove anything. It's trying to embody something. Stoics taught that virtue is its own reward. You don't practice justice because others will call you just. You practice it because justice is good. You don't tell the truth to be labeled honest. You tell it because falsehood slowly breaks your own soul. You don't act with courage to be admired. You do it because fear unchecked will rule your life. Once you begin to see the cost of moral performance, you start to step back. You realize how exhausting it is to always be seen as on the right side. You see how quickly people turn when your view doesn't match theirs. You recognize that trying to be everything for everyone only creates a fragile, shifting self. Silent strength is immune to that, because it doesn't care about being included. It cares about being real. It focuses on responsibility, not optics, on growth, not claps. It sees virtue as a long road that must be walked daily, not a label to wear in public. You may see someone signal loudly online, say all the right things, use all the correct language, and gain instant approval. It looks like strength. But test it in adversity. When the stakes are high, when compromise is tempting, when applause turns to criticism, and often it collapses. because it was built on the need to be liked, not the courage to be true. Silent strength might go unnoticed by the crowd. It might even be misunderstood. But it doesn't bend, because it's not trying to be liked. It's trying to be consistent. It holds the same values in private that it speaks in public. And often, it doesn't even speak at all. It just acts. The person who gives without needing to post it, who helps without needing praise, who forgives without needing to be called kind, that's someone rooted in something deeper. That's a person who would rather be than appear. That is the essence of Stoic virtue. In a culture built on display, this can feel almost rebellious. Silence can feel like invisibility. Restraint can feel like failure. But when you begin to live from principle, those feelings fade. Because you stop needing recognition. You don't abandon the world. You simply stop performing for it. You also stop competing in moral Olympics. The urge to prove you're more aware, more evolved, more correct than others fades. Instead of trying to be right louder, you work on being right quietly. Not in argument, but in action. Not to win, but to build. That's where real change starts. Silent strength is also less fragile, because it's not dependent on others for confirmation. It can take criticism without losing its center. It can be misjudged without breaking. It doesn't constantly need to explain or defend itself. It remains grounded even when others are louder, flashier, or more praised. That doesn't mean silent strength avoids responsibility. It steps up when needed. It speaks when silence would be cowardice. But when it speaks with intention. Not for reaction, not to be liked, but because the words are necessary and because they align with the person speaking them. This approach builds lasting influence. People may not notice you first, but they remember you longer. Because when the trends fade, when the noise quiets, when the crowd shifts again, what remains is depth, presence, character. And those are remembered, not for how loud they were, but for how solid they stayed. You can practice this by becoming more selective with your words. Speak when it adds value. Act when no one will thank you. Serve when no one is looking. Align your private self with your public one so closely that there's no difference. That doesn't mean perfection, it means honesty. You can also practice by not reacting to every injustice with public outrage, but with private change. Ask what you're doing about it, not just what you're saying about it. Action carries weight. Words without action evaporate. Over time, you will see the shift. You'll post less, but live more. You'll need less praise and feel more peace. You'll attract those who respect substance over show. And you'll repel those who only value performance, which is a gift in itself. You stop trying to be impressive. You focus on being real. You stop needing attention. You focus on intention. You stop worrying about how others see you. You begin building a life you can see clearly, one that makes sense even in solitude, even in silence. That is the kind of strength that outlasts everything. Not because it shouted louder, but because it stood still, spoke truth, and kept moving forward, quietly, consistently, unshaken. Once you begin to live with silent strength instead of performing for approval, something subtle but powerful starts to happen. You no longer need to declare your values to prove them. You stop reacting to noise and instead move with clarity. But this quiet consistency doesn't guarantee agreement from others. In fact, living this way often draws resistance. People may question your silence. They may misunderstand your restraint. Some will oppose your choices, your voice, your path, not always out of malice, but because they feel challenged by the steadiness you carry. Now the test becomes more complex. How do you respond to those who oppose you? Not strangers online or distant critics, but those close enough to wound, strong enough to confront, bold enough to stand in your way. This is where many lose their footing. They fall into two extremes. Either they submit and silence themselves for peace, or they fight to win at all costs, turning opposition into war. Both are easy. Neither builds respect. The Stoic path is different. It calls for honorable opposition. This is not about pretending to get along with everyone. It's about how you handle disagreement when it finds you. Not if, but when. Because if you live by principle, you will inevitably run into friction. And how you carry yourself in those moments says more about your strength than any public stance or private discipline. Honorable opposition begins with clarity of values. If you don't know what you stand for, you'll either retreat at the first pushback or lash out when challenged. The Stoic does neither. He holds his ground, not stubbornly, but firmly. He doesn't raise his voice because his conviction doesn't come from volume. It comes from alignment. The words he speaks are not meant to dominate, but to clarify. He doesn't avoid conflict, but he also doesn't manufacture it. He meets it when it arrives, and when it does, he's ready. To earn respect from those who disagree with you, you must first respect yourself enough not to betray your values for approval. You must be willing to be disliked without becoming bitter, to be corrected without becoming defensive, to be insulted without returning cruelty. This takes strength, not the kind found in aggression, but the kind forged in restraint. It's easy to win arguments by force. It's easy to use cleverness, sarcasm, or dominance to shut someone down. But those victories are shallow. They win the moment, not the respect. True respect, especially from those who stand against you, often comes from how you carry yourself under pressure. Opposition is a mirror. It shows you where your ego still reacts, where your insecurity still hides, where your need to be liked still lingers. If someone disagrees with you and it shakes your identity, then your identity was never steady to begin with. But if someone challenges you and you remain composed, honest, and open, then you reveal something rare: strength without hostility. This doesn't mean weakness. Honorable opposition is not surrender. It's not about giving up your beliefs to keep things comfortable. It's about expressing truth with dignity. It's about confronting when needed, but doing so without hatred. It's about defending your ground, not attacking someone else's. One of the reasons opposition turns toxic is because people don't listen to understand. They listen to respond. They prepare arguments like weapons. But a Stoic doesn't enter that arena. He doesn't treat disagreement as a threat, but as a test of clarity. He speaks not to win, but to remain aligned with his principles. That is where respect begins, even from opponents. And over time, people notice. They may not agree with you. They may even continue to resist you. But something shifts. Because in a world where disagreement often turns into destruction, your calmness becomes a signal. You become someone who can be challenged without collapsing. Someone who can receive harsh words without returning fire. That steadiness is not weakness. It is control, and control is respected, even by those who don't share your views. Honorable opposition also means knowing when to walk away. Not because you're defeated, but because the conversation no longer serves growth. The ego wants to win every debate. But wisdom knows that not every disagreement needs to be resolved. Sometimes the most powerful act of strength is saying nothing. not because you're afraid, but because your energy is not for sale. You don't owe a reaction to every opinion. The Stoics taught this through example. They often disagreed with emperors, generals, and political leaders, but they did so without cruelty. They spoke plainly, they held their ground, and they paid the price when necessary. But they never traded their character for survival. That choice often cost them status. It never cost them their soul. You can practice this by observing your reactions in disagreement. Notice your tone. Notice the pace of your breathing. Do you interrupt? Do you wait only to strike back? Or do you hold space to listen even when you disagree completely? This does not make you passive. It makes you dangerous in the best way, unshaken, unreactive, untouchable by petty tactics. Respect from enemies is not won through dominance. It's earned by refusing to betray yourself even when pressed. It's earned by acting from principle while others act from ego. It's earned when your silence is not retreat, but intention, when your response is not performance, but clarity, when your disagreement is not rooted in superiority, but in truth. Not everyone will honor this. Some will still insult you. Some will still twist your words. Some will still reject your presence. But their reaction is not your burden. Your burden is how you carry your own truth. And when you do that without flinching, without yelling, without bending, something rare happens. Even those who stand against you feel it. They may not admit it. They may never say it. But they will respect it. Because deep down, everyone knows the difference between power that's performed and power that's earned. This is the art of honorable opposition. It's not flashy. It's not easy. But it's real. And in a world quick to divide, it becomes a form of leadership that cannot be faked. Not through winning, not through pleasing, but through principle held steady in the fire. Earning respect through dignified opposition proves you no longer need to overpower others to remain rooted. You have trained yourself to meet resistance with principle, not ego. But even with this strength, the most complicated test often lies closer to home. In places where love, history, and obligation mix, your personal relationships. These are the spaces where approval hides in the smallest gestures, where boundaries blur without warning, and where the fear of disconnection can slowly make you betray yourself. Most people don't lose themselves all at once. It happens in tiny, quiet ways, inside relationships they care deeply about. A favor accepted out of guilt. A silence held too long to keep the peace. A choice postponed so someone else doesn't feel uncomfortable. It feels like kindness, like loyalty, like being a good person. But over time, something inside begins to erode. The Stoics were clear about the dangers of overextension. They taught that love without clarity becomes a trap. That sacrifice without boundaries becomes servitude. That connection without truth becomes a performance. Approval in relationships is the most seductive form because it dresses itself as care. It tells you that saying yes is love, that saying no is cold, that setting limits is selfish. But those who always give, always bend, always say yes, often carry the heaviest quiet resentment. Respect cannot exist without boundaries, not from strangers, not from enemies, and especially not from the people closest to you. If you have to lose yourself to keep someone else close, you're not in a relationship, you're in a trade, and over time, that trade will cost you not just your peace, but your identity. The Stoics practiced firmness without hostility. They believed you could love others deeply without letting them consume your clarity. That family, friendship, and intimacy are not excuses to ignore truth. That real connection doesn't mean becoming whatever the other person needs. It means showing up whole and allowing them to do the same. This requires boundaries, not as punishment, not as control, but as the structure that keeps love from becoming manipulation. Without boundaries, people will keep taking until you forget how to say no. And the longer you wait, the harder it becomes. Your silence turns into expectation. Your effort becomes invisible. Your kindness becomes a script. And the moment you rewrite it, the other person feels betrayed. Setting boundaries starts with recognizing your limits. Where are you overextending? Where are you saying yes when your body says no? Where are you tolerating behavior that leaves you drained or bitter? These are not complaints. These are signs. When respected, they become your compass. When ignored, they become your burden. Boundaries don't break connection. They clarify it. They define what you're available for and what you're not. They teach others how to treat you. They make relationships more honest. Because when people know where you stand, they stop guessing. And when you enforce your lines, you stop feeling invisible. But here's the trap. Approval seeks to blur those lines. It whispers that if you speak up, they'll be hurt. If you push back, they'll leave. If you take space, they'll feel rejected. This fear manipulates your actions until you're living in constant negotiation, trying to manage their feelings, their reactions, their expectations. Slowly, your life becomes about preventing their discomfort. The Stoic approach offers a different path. It teaches that each person is responsible for their own emotions, that your role is not to control how others feel, but to live with virtue, that your peace is not something you owe, it's something you protect. This doesn't make you heartless, it makes you honest. You can love people and still tell them no. You can be available and still have needs. You can care deeply and still walk away when your boundaries are violated. This kind of strength often shocks others, especially if you've trained them to expect sacrifice. But the discomfort it causes is not a reason to retreat. It's proof that something is changing. And in healthy relationships, that change leads to growth. People who truly care for you will adjust. They will learn your boundaries and honor them. They may struggle at first, but they will respect you more, not less, because deep down, everyone knows that a person who doesn't protect themselves cannot be trusted to protect anything. This respect must start with you. If you keep betraying your needs for the comfort of others, you teach the world to ignore you. You confirm that your voice is optional, that your limits are flexible, that your peace can be rented. And once that pattern takes hold, breaking it will feel like betrayal, even to yourself. But the betrayal has already happened. It just didn't make noise. The real pain comes from self-abandonment disguised as care, from swallowing your voice to keep harmony, from tolerating behavior that quietly wounds you, all in the name of connection. Boundaries restore balance. They let you give from fullness, not obligation. They allow you to show up present, not resentful. They create relationships where love doesn't require you to shrink, soften, or disappear. And boundaries aren't just about what you say no to. They're also about what you say yes to. Time alone. Honesty, even when it's awkward. Space to grow. Conversations that challenge comfort. Values that don't shift based on who you're talking to. Boundaries are a full declaration of who you are, not a fence to keep others out, but a way to let the right people in. You practice this by being direct, by not apologizing for your needs, by speaking without excessive explanation. Approval will push you to over-justify your limits. Don't. A simple no, said calmly, is enough. When you start doing this, some people may pull away. Let them. It's better to be alone in truth than surrounded by those who only love the version of you that never says no. Over time, boundaries create deeper respect, not just from others, but from yourself. You begin to see your own value more clearly. You start showing up with more energy because you're no longer leaking your time and emotional strength into situations that leave you depleted. You also stop over-functioning. You stop trying to fix everyone's problems. You stop carrying weight that was never yours. You give others the dignity of managing their own lives while you reclaim responsibility for your own. That shift is subtle, but it transforms how you relate to the world. Relationships become simpler, not colder. The noise fades, the pressure lifts, the resentment evaporates, and what's left is mutual respect. Built not on sacrifice, but on clarity, not on guilt, but on honesty, not on fear of disconnection, but on the courage to stay connected while still being whole. That's what the Stoics meant by right relationship, one that honors truth over tension, boundaries over approval, integrity over pleasing. And in living this way, you create something rare, a life where your presence is not given for survival, but offered from fullness. Where the people in your life know you deeply, not because you gave everything, but because you stood for something. That's not just respect, that's freedom. After learning how to honor yourself through clear boundaries, you begin to notice something else. Something quieter, but just as important. Even after you've drawn the line, even after you've made a decision that respects your time, your energy, your truth, there's still a voice inside that feels the need to explain, to soften the impact, to justify, to prove that you meant well. And once again, you're pulled back into seeking understanding instead of standing firm. This habit is deeply wired, but it's not harmless. The need to explain yourself all the time is a form of self-doubt dressed as politeness. It convinces you that clarity must be followed by defense, that your decisions require permission, and that your peace depends on how well others understand your reasons. It feels safe, but it quietly erodes your authority. Stoic thought draws a firm line here. Explain when necessary, but never out of fear. Speak to inform, not to please. When you constantly justify your actions, you teach others that your choices are fragile, open to debate, dependent on approval. And once you start defending every step you take, it becomes harder to walk at all. There's a difference between communication and over-explaining. One comes from clarity, the other comes from insecurity. Communication is sharing the essentials with intention. Over-explaining is an attempt to manage how others feel about you. It's often disguised as transparency, but beneath it is a fear of being misunderstood. This fear is powerful. Most people don't want to be seen as difficult, rude, cold, selfish, so they pad their truths with disclaimers. They speak in circles instead of direct lines. They turn no into long explanations. They turn simple choices into hours of emotional labor. But in trying not to offend, they end up weakening their position. Explaining too much invites negotiation where there should be none. The more you explain, the more you give others something to push against. You're handing them the tools to disassemble your decision. You may think you're creating understanding, but often you're just opening space for doubt. Silence, when used well, is strength. It doesn't mean avoidance or withdrawal. It means refusing to fill the space with unnecessary detail. It means trusting that your no or your yes stands on its own, that your choice is valid without a paragraph to back it up, that your reasons are yours, not a public offering. The Stoics knew that true confidence speaks less, not more. They practiced the art of saying only what was needed, then allowing the rest to speak for itself. This wasn't about coldness, it was about self-command. The belief that clarity doesn't beg, that truth doesn't stutter, that conviction does not need to be dressed up to be real. You build this kind of clarity by noticing where you explain the most. Pay attention to when your voice speeds up, when your tone shifts, when your words start to multiply. These are signs that you're moving from assertion into apology. And often, you're not explaining for the other person. You're doing it to protect how you're being perceived. Stop and ask yourself, what am I afraid they'll think if I don't explain? And then go deeper. Why is their understanding more important than my peace? When you begin answering those questions honestly, you'll find that over-explaining is rarely about connection. It's about control. Control of the narrative, control of how others react, control of their opinion of you. But the truth is, you can't control what people think, not with words, not with logic, not with endless justification. People will see what they choose to see. They will understand only what they're ready to understand. No amount of explaining will change that. And when you keep trying to change it, you hand over your energy. You give away your stillness. You drain yourself for people who may never offer you the same grace in return. This doesn't mean you become closed off or dismissive. It means you choose where to offer depth. It means you speak with precision. You share the why when it builds clarity, not when it's just a defense mechanism. You stop narrating your choices as if you're on trial. People respect those who move with calm clarity, who make decisions and don't feel the need to sell them, who say yes and no with a tone that leaves no room for negotiation, not because it's harsh, but because it's rooted. This is not about becoming unkind. It's about becoming efficient with your truth. If someone trusts you, they'll respect your decisions. If they don't, no explanation will convince them. So conserve your words. Let your life speak louder than your justifications. There's also an emotional cost to over-explaining. It creates mental noise. You replay conversations in your head. You wonder if you said it right. You analyze reactions. You carry the weight of making sure everyone feels okay with what you said. That burden gets heavier over time. It leaves little space for joy, for presence, for peace. The antidote is stillness. Stillness in your speech. Stillness in your decisions. Stillness in how you show up. You make your choice, and you let it stand. If someone asks for more, you assess. Is more truly needed? Or am I just afraid of being judged? Most times, silence says more than another explanation ever could. This shift won't happen overnight, especially if you were raised to seek harmony at any cost. If you were taught that being understood is the same as being safe. But the more you practice, the more you realize that not everything requires a defense, that not everyone deserves your reasons, that you are allowed to decide and be done. The result is a quieter mind, a calmer body, a more focused energy. You no longer spread yourself thin trying to manage everyone's perception. You don't shrink from disagreement. You don't panic when your choice is questioned. You simply stand, and that stillness becomes your presence. In time, others will begin to notice. They may not say it directly, but they'll feel the shift. The conversations will change. The way they approach you will change. Not because you've become harder, but because you've become clearer. Your boundaries are no longer up for debate. Your choices no longer come with disclaimers. Your yes means yes. Your no means no. That's not resistance. That's integrity. So speak when it adds value. Clarify when it prevents confusion. But release the need to explain who you are, what you do, and why you do it to people who may never care enough to understand. Your peace does not require a defense, and neither does your truth. Once you stop explaining yourself out of fear, something unexpected begins to take shape. You realize not every pause needs to be filled. You discover that silence is not a weakness to fix, but a strength to master. And in that silence, you find a deeper power. The kind that doesn't argue, the kind that doesn't chase, the kind that doesn't try to prove anything. It simply is, calm, deliberate, undeniable. Stillness is often misunderstood. In a world addicted to movement, noise, and speed, stillness can be seen as hesitation. But real stillness, the kind that comes from discipline, presence, and clarity, is never hesitation. It is control. It is choice. It is the complete refusal to be pulled by every passing emotion or every loud demand. It is the art of not reacting when everyone else is busy performing. Stillness is not the absence of action. It is the refusal to act from panic. It is what keeps your hand steady when pressure rises. It is what allows you to pause when others rush. It is what gives your words weight because they are no longer poured out to fill space. They are chosen. People underestimate stillness because it is quiet, because it is not dressed in adrenaline or drama. But the ones who carry it often hold more influence than those who speak constantly. Stillness is not loud, but it draws attention. It makes others lean in. It carries the kind of presence that does not need introduction. The Stoics cultivated stillness as a foundational discipline. Marcus Aurelius often wrote to himself about the power of remaining unmoved in the middle of chaos. He saw stillness not as passivity, but as strength, the discipline to pause, to reflect, to observe rather than react. In that pause, wisdom has space to rise. When you embody stillness, you no longer rush to fill silences with justification. You don't rush to respond in disagreement. You don't collapse under pressure to please. Your body language becomes relaxed. Your breathing slows. Your eyes hold contact not to dominate, but to stay connected. And people feel this. It's not something you announce. It's something they experience. Stillness communicates trust in yourself. You are no longer moved by every opinion. You don't seek attention to prove your relevance. You don't explain every move to prove your worth. You do not fear the absence of external reaction, because your inner compass is louder than the crowd. You earn respect through this stillness, not because of what you say, but because of what you don't say. Not because of what you do in a rush, but because of what you do not do in panic. The ability to wait, the ability to observe, the ability to remain centered when things are uncertain. This is rare. This is power. Stillness also sharpens your judgment. When you are not rushing, when you are not reacting, you see more, you hear more, you notice what others miss. You learn to read tone, posture, silence, and gaps between words. You become more precise, more strategic, more in control of your outcomes. This control is not imposed. It flows from self-mastery. This is where real confidence begins. Not the kind that needs to be seen, but the kind that doesn't disappear when things go quiet. Most people are not truly afraid of failure. They are afraid of facing themselves in silence. That's why they keep moving, talking, doing. But when you embrace stillness, you become comfortable with your own presence. You don't need distraction to feel whole. Stillness makes you a better communicator. When you speak, you are no longer trying to impress. You are trying to be clear. You don't interrupt. You don't fill the space with unnecessary words. You allow others to finish. You listen without preparing your response. And when you do respond, your words carry depth, not because they are perfect, but because they are measured. This makes your boundaries stronger. You don't shout to be heard. You state what matters, then pause. You don't chase people for understanding. You let your actions communicate your standard. You don't repeat yourself to gain approval. You move once with clarity and trust that the right people will understand. Stillness also protects your energy. When you don't react to every demand, you have more space to choose what matters. You don't rush decisions. You don't get swept up in group urgency. You become deliberate in your time, your presence, your yes and no. You stop moving out of habit and start moving from alignment. There is a kind of dignity in stillness that performance cannot match. When you no longer seek to dominate or disappear, when you no longer seek to explain or apologize for simply existing, you settle into a deeper version of yourself. And from that place, respect is no longer something you chase, it's something you carry. Stillness is especially powerful during conflict. When emotions rise, when words are sharp, when tension builds, your ability to remain calm shifts the entire tone of the interaction. People expect escalation, but your calm disarms it. They expect you to match their energy, but your stillness changes theirs. You do not win by overpowering. You win by not being pulled into the chaos. It is not a weakness to pause before answering. It is not a flaw to be measured with your words. It is not a failure to choose silence when others shout. These are strengths. These are choices. These are signals that you are not reactive. You are intentional. Stillness also allows you to stay connected to your principles. When everything around you moves quickly, stillness gives you space to return to what matters. You are not seduced by urgency. You are not tricked into believing that faster means better. You act only when it aligns. You move only when it serves. This kind of strength doesn't look like force. It looks like grounded presence. It doesn't look like dominance. It looks like self-possession. People may overlook it at first, but they feel it. They adjust to it. They begin to speak to you differently. They begin to measure their words. Not because you demand it, but because your stillness commands it. Stillness teaches you restraint, not out of fear, but out of discipline. The discipline to not say what doesn't need to be said. The discipline to not act just to feel useful. The discipline to let things unfold without rushing to interfere. The discipline to know that waiting is not wasting. You will find that stillness allows you to recover faster. You don't waste energy explaining your intentions. You don't drain yourself chasing after every correction. You conserve your focus. You return to center more quickly. That restoration becomes part of your power. While others burn out from overreaching, you remain steady. In daily life, this stillness shows up in your walk, your tone, your gaze, in the way you enter a room without trying to fill it, in the way you listen without needing to interrupt, in the way you speak without trying to control. This is not passivity. It is clarity that doesn't beg. Stillness is also an invitation. It invites others to slow down. It signals that you do not need chaos to feel alive, that you do not need attention to feel valuable, that you do not need noise to feel relevant. It invites depth in a world of surface. To practice stillness, begin with awareness. Notice your urges to fill space, to speak quickly, to fix what feels uncomfortable. Let those urges pass. Observe them without reacting. Train yourself to pause, not forever, just long enough to choose. You don't have to change everything overnight. You can begin in one conversation, one decision, one response. Each time you choose stillness over reaction, you reclaim your power. You return to the present. You step out of fear. You move from noise to clarity. And as this becomes your way of being, you will notice something remarkable. the world around you begins to shift, not because you controlled it, but because you no longer need to. That is the quiet power of stillness. It does not seek to be seen. It allows itself to be felt. Once you begin to live with stillness, your presence changes. You no longer chase urgency. You begin to make decisions with space between impulse and action. But something else quietly shifts beneath that calm, your awareness of time. You start to see how much of your peace, your focus, your energy has been spent, not with care, but with habit. And that's when the next truth rises. How you use your time is the clearest statement of how much you respect yourself. Most people think respect is in words, tone, appearance, but one of the most overlooked expressions of self-respect is in how you protect your time. Not with harshness, but with intention. Your schedule reflects what you value. Your attention reveals your priorities. Your calendar is not just a tool, it's a mirror. It shows who you are listening to, what you are feeding, what you are building. And more often than not, it shows what you're afraid to say no to. You can speak about boundaries all you want, but if your time is constantly being given to things that drain you, then those boundaries aren't real. You may be saying the right words while your actions leak energy. Time does not lie. It doesn't care about your goals, your dreams, your ideals. It moves forward, no matter how you use it. And once spent, it does not return. The Stoics warned us about wasting time. Seneca wrote that most people complain about the shortness of life when what they should be examining is how carelessly they spend it. He said it clearly. Life is long if you know how to use it. What shortens it is not age, but distraction. There is no clearer form of self-neglect than giving your time to people, tasks, or habits that do not serve your values. It's a silent erosion, one missed hour at a time, one repeated task that doesn't matter, one conversation that goes in circles, one notification that turns into 30 minutes of scrolling, and soon the day is gone, and with it, a piece of your life that could have been used to build something better. When you don't respect your own time, no one else will. People will treat your availability as permission. If you say yes to everything, they will ask for more. If you respond instantly, they will expect you to remain on call. If you fill your hours with meaningless urgency, the meaningful will never get done. And slowly, the person you want to be stays in the future while your present is handed away piece by piece. To live with self-respect, you must begin seeing time as a currency far more valuable than money. Money can be regained. Time cannot. You can't borrow it. You can't store it. You can only choose how to spend it right now. And every choice reveals what you believe you're worth. This doesn't mean filling your days with productivity at all costs. Self-respect is not found in constant work. It's found in alignment. Are your hours reflecting your priorities? Are you investing in what matters, or are you avoiding what matters through busyness? Time respect begins with clarity. You need to know what you value before you can protect space for it. What are your non-negotiables? What do you want your life to reflect? What kind of presence do you want to offer others? What kind of mind do you want to build? If you don't schedule time for these things, something else will take their place. You start protecting your time by saying no more often. No is not a rejection of others. It is a protection of focus. It says, I cannot give this hour to you because I have already given it to something that matters more. And if that something is rest, solitude, creativity, deep work, or simply silence, it is still worthy. Just because someone else doesn't value your time doesn't mean you should follow. Your phone will not set boundaries for you. Your inbox will not clear itself. Your day will not automatically respect your deepest values. These things must be done deliberately. You must become the guardian of your time. And the more you do, the more you'll find your energy returning, not because life slowed down, but because you stopped wasting hours on what was never yours to carry. When you begin living this way, you may feel discomfort. You may feel guilt for turning things down. You may feel fear that people will be disappointed. That's part of the change, but over time they will adapt, or they will leave. And either way, you'll be left with a life that reflects intention, not obligation. Time management is often spoken of as a tool of success. But for the Stoic, it is first and foremost a moral issue. How you spend your time is how you spend your life. If you are careless with it, you are careless with your own potential. If you are intentional with it, even your quiet hours become powerful. You practice self-respect by blocking time for what refuels you. Reflection, learning, creation, rest, movement. These are not luxuries. They are the roots of a grounded life. They are the foundations that allow you to show up strong, not scattered. And when your life reflects these rhythms, others take notice, not because you explained your priorities, but because you lived them. Time allocation also reflects how much you trust yourself. If you're constantly jumping from task to task, filling every space with noise, it often means you don't trust what will rise if you slow down. But when you give yourself time to think, to be, to breathe, you begin to recover clarity. And clarity makes you stronger. There is no achievement without ownership of time. You will not write the book, build the business, repair the relationship, deepen the practice, or heal the wound if you're constantly distracted. Focus is built by choice, and the more often you choose, the more automatic it becomes. The people who seem calm and centered often aren't less busy. They are more selective. They have learned that time given to the wrong thing costs more than it seems. It steals energy. It creates resentment. It clouds thinking. You don't need more hours in the day. You need fewer commitments that aren't aligned. One way to begin shifting is to ask yourself at the end of each day, did my time today reflect the life I want to live? This question doesn't shame. It refocuses. You begin to see where hours were spent reacting instead of choosing. You begin to notice patterns, and once you see, you can shift. You also reclaim time by creating boundaries around how people access you. Not everyone needs instant replies. Not every request is urgent. You are not a machine designed to respond. You are a person designed to create, to reflect, to grow, to live. Time is the space where those things happen. Protect it. You do not owe every moment to your job, your feed, or your notifications. You are allowed to be unavailable. You are allowed to take hours for depth, not speed. You are allowed to structure your life in a way that feels meaningful, even if others don't understand it. And if they don't, that's okay. Respect begins with how you treat your own hours. If they choose not to honor that, it reflects their priorities, not your value. In time, those who are meant to walk with you will learn the rhythm of your life. They will come to respect your space, your focus, your pace, not because you demanded it, but because you lived it. That is the quiet message of time. What you honor reflects what you believe about yourself. So begin now. Look at your time as a form of communication. Let it reflect self-respect. Let it mirror clarity. Let it prove that you no longer spend your life by default. Let every hour become a statement, not of busyness, but of worth. When you begin treating time like a reflection of your values, your life gains shape. No longer scattered, no longer diluted, no longer surrendered to urgency. You act with direction. But there's one more layer underneath this structure, something less visible, but even more powerful. It is not found in what you say or do, but in how you respond, or rather, how you don't. That final piece is non-reactivity, and it quietly separates the grounded from the restless, the strong from the loud, the free from the easily controlled. Non-reactivity is not about indifference. It's not about being numb, emotionless, or detached from the world. It's the ability to observe a situation clearly, remain composed in discomfort, and choose your response with intention instead of being driven by impulse. It is the mental discipline to pause when others would lash out, to remain still when provoked, to avoid dancing for praise or shrinking under criticism. The Stoics held this capacity as a foundation of strength. They saw the reactive mind as untrained, unsettled, and easily controlled by external events. To them, power wasn't about appearing invincible, it was about not giving your emotions away to things you cannot control. Whether insulted, ignored, misjudged, or praised, the Stoic does not shift with the wind. Most people are reactive by habit. They respond to praise with inflated confidence and to insult with wounded pride. They react to disrespect with emotional fire, trying to prove something or correct perception. But this cycle creates dependence. You become someone whose peace is constantly disturbed by the moods of others. Non-reactivity breaks that cycle. It teaches you to stop allowing every external thing to reach into your internal world, not by ignoring reality, but by choosing what is worth your emotional attention. Most things are not. Most arguments are not rooted in truth. Most insults are projections. Most praise is conditional. When you build your identity on either, you make your worth unstable. When you're reactive, others learn how to control you. They know which words to say to make you feel small. They know what kind of silence will trigger your need for reassurance. They learn how to keep you chasing their approval, fearing their disapproval, constantly adjusting. This is how people lose themselves, one emotional reaction at a time. But non-reactivity tells a different story. When someone insults you and you do not flinch, they're forced to sit with their own words. When someone offers flattery and you do not melt, they realize you are not hungry for it. When someone pushes you to respond emotionally and you remain clear, you show them that you are not shaped by their actions. This kind of presence creates weight. You no longer need to raise your voice. You no longer need to prove your point. You no longer need to convince anyone of your worth. You simply act, calmly and consistently in line with your values. And that calmness, especially in the middle of emotional noise, is rare, which is why it's respected. It's easy to be reactive when things feel personal. When someone questions your motives, ignores your effort, mocks your silence. But those are the exact moments that test who you've become, not in theory, but in practice. Can you observe the attack and still choose not to fight? Can you feel the sting and still decide to move forward without responding? That pause between trigger and reaction is where self-mastery lives. It is not weakness. It's the choice to remain in control of your own mind when someone else is trying to rent space inside it. Every time you hold that pause, you reinforce your freedom. You teach your nervous system that not every emotion needs action. You train your mind to move from clarity, not chaos. Over time, this becomes your natural response. You still feel, but you're not ruled by those feelings. You still listen, but you're not moved by every word. You still care, but you're not manipulated by approval or silence. Your peace stops being so fragile. Non-reactivity also sharpens your decision-making. When you don't react instantly, you give your mind time to think clearly, to see the full picture, to notice the patterns. You stop choosing out of fear, pride, or anxiety. You start choosing from alignment. That makes your actions more precise, less noise, more impact. In relationships, non-reactivity builds trust. People know you won't explode when things get tense. They know you can hold discomfort without blaming. They know you won't weaponize emotion to control or escape. That steadiness builds safety, not just for others, but for yourself. You stop being afraid of your own reactions because you no longer see them as inevitable. The world often rewards dramatic response. Social media thrives on emotional reaction. Outrage goes viral. But the most powerful people in any room are the ones who don't flinch, who stay grounded, who listen without jumping, who speak only when it matters. These people are not detached, they are disciplined. You practice non-reactivity in small moments. Someone interrupts you, someone criticizes your tone, someone posts something about you. You feel the rise, the urge to respond. You breathe, you sit with the urge, and you wait. You choose not to be pulled. You let it pass, and in that small choice, you reclaim your energy. Eventually, you see that most things don't need a reaction. They just need space. Let the insult echo back to its speaker. Let the compliment pass through you without altering your course. Let the silence sit without rushing to fill it. These choices build power. Non-reactivity also protects your time. You're no longer derailed by every provocation. You don't lose hours replaying conversations or planning the perfect comeback. You remain focused. You remain moving. You don't stop every time someone wants a piece of your mind. Your direction is no longer at the mercy of other people's emotions. It does not mean you never feel. It means you own what you feel. It means you pause long enough to ask, is this worth my time? Is this aligned with my purpose? Is this necessary, or am I reacting out of habit? That habit breaks when you learn to stay with the discomfort rather than escape it through reaction. And when others watch you do this, they sense something different. They may not understand it. They may even try harder to provoke it. But in the end, they feel your presence. Not because you're loud, but because you're unmoved. This is what it means to carry non-reactivity, not to become less human, but more whole. Not to suppress, but to choose. Not to fear emotion, but to stop being controlled by it. Let others chase attention. Let others prove themselves through conflict. Let others fall into the loop of approval and retaliation. You move differently. You pause. You breathe. You see the moment for what it is, and you rise above it. That choice is quiet, but it changes everything. When you stop reacting to everything around you, you gain space to act with purpose instead of pressure. But in that silence, a different kind of noise often rises, not from the outside world, but from within. Thoughts begin circling, doubts appear. You begin questioning your own clarity. Was that the right choice? Should I have said more? What if I made a mistake? The storm no longer comes from others, it comes from you. This is the inner courtroom. It's where your mind becomes both the judge and the defendant, where every decision is reviewed, every word is replayed, and every instinct is put on trial. not to improve, but to doubt, to defend, to justify. This courtroom doesn't ask for truth. It demands perfection. It wants you to prove over and over that you're allowed to take up space, to say no, to walk away, to rest, to change. It never rests, and it never declares you innocent for long. Stoicism teaches that true freedom isn't just about external stability, it's about internal authority. You cannot claim peace while constantly putting yourself on trial. The endless self-questioning may feel responsible, even thoughtful, but often it's a disguised form of self-disrespect. If your instinct was aligned with your values, why must it be defended in your own mind? This constant internal debate is exhausting. It burns energy without building clarity. It fills quiet moments with unease. Even when the outside world accepts your choice, you continue interrogating yourself. Not because there's new information, but because you've conditioned your mind to doubt its own voice. You don't need to be loud to live with conviction, but you do need to stop acting like your judgment is always on probation. This doesn't mean refusing reflection. It means knowing the difference between healthy review and self-attack. Self-reflection helps you grow. Inner trials keep you small. The first sharpens clarity. The second drains your strength. One of the reasons we argue with ourselves is because we're still waiting for permission. Deep down, we want someone to say we did the right thing, that we're good, that we're allowed to trust our own steps. But that permission never really comes, not from outside, not even from the internal courtroom, because it's built on the idea that you must earn your own approval constantly through repeated defense. The Stoic way is to break that cycle. You don't owe yourself a perfect explanation for every decision. You don't need to justify every action with endless analysis. You don't need to replay every conversation looking for hidden errors. If you acted from principle, if you moved from alignment, that's enough. You begin to build self-respect by refusing to put yourself on trial for being clear. You stop defending choices that were necessary. You stop apologizing to yourself for saying no. You stop digging for reasons to feel guilty. You understand that self-trust means making room for decisions without requiring constant reassurance. This shift takes work. The mind is used to seeking evidence. It wants to weigh both sides. It wants to argue and control. But life is not a legal case, and your value is not up for debate. You don't need to convince yourself that you deserve peace. You claim it by how you choose to speak to yourself. When you act with integrity and still feel the urge to review it in your head for the 5th time, pause. Ask yourself why. What are you afraid of? What would change if you just let the moment go? Often, nothing would change, except your peace returning. This is how you start rejecting the inner courtroom, not by silencing your thoughts with force, but by refusing to feed them with doubt. You let them come. You let them pass. You don't argue. You don't explain. You remember that the part of you seeking constant reassurance is not your truth. It's your training. You were likely taught, directly or indirectly, to distrust your own judgment, maybe through criticism, maybe through overcorrection, maybe through experiences where you were punished for choosing yourself. Over time, you learned to build a case for everything you did, to think of every possible outcome, to defend every impulse, to seek approval not only from others, but from the voice in your own head. But that voice isn't always wise. It's often just old fear echoing in the present. You heal that by creating a new voice, one that says, I made this choice on purpose. I acted from clarity. I don't need to explain myself to myself. You begin to build that inner voice by practicing stillness after action. You decide, then let the decision breathe. You notice when the debate starts, and you choose not to attend. This is not denial, it's discipline. You are not avoiding accountability. You are ending the loop of emotional self-punishment. You are giving yourself room to grow without treating every moment as a moral test. You are creating an internal environment where strength is built, not drained. And as this becomes your habit, your internal world begins to feel different. There is more calm, more space, less urgency. You begin to notice how much energy was spent arguing with shadows. You begin to see how little those debates ever helped. You stop needing to feel ready before acting. You stop overthinking small decisions. You start trusting your direction without checking in with the mental jury every step of the way. This change also influences how others see you. People can feel when you are at peace with yourself. They sense when you act without self-doubt. It doesn't make you arrogant, it makes you consistent. Your presence feels more solid. You no longer come across as someone who's looking for approval, even if silently. You come across as someone who's already decided. This doesn't mean you never rethink things. It means you no longer do so compulsively. You learn to schedule reflection, not surrender to it endlessly. You ask yourself once, maybe twice, and then move on. You remind yourself that not every answer comes through more thought. Sometimes it comes through letting go. This is how you turn down the volume of the courtroom. One decision at a time, one pause at a time, one breath where you choose not to argue. And when you do, you make room for a stronger, quieter, clearer version of yourself to step forward. Not because you've won the case, but because you've stopped putting yourself on trial. That is the beginning of a different kind of freedom. No verdict needed. Letting go of the need to argue with yourself creates a powerful kind of silence. It's not the absence of thought, it's the presence of trust. When your mind no longer attacks every choice you make, something deeper rises. You begin to move from principle, not pressure. You no longer need to be understood by the world or even by your past self. But the moment you step into that stillness, another challenge appears, one that has tested every person who has ever lived by conviction. What happens when your truth puts you at odds with everyone around you? This is the question that separates those who live by convenience from those who live by character. And throughout history, a few rare individuals have answered it not with words, but with action. They stood still while the crowd moved. They spoke clearly while others remained silent. They were not reckless, they were principled. And when their values cost them applause, they did not fold. They chose dignity over popularity. The Stoics were not just philosophers, they were practitioners. They didn't write about strength from a place of comfort. They demonstrated it in the face of political power, exile, betrayal, war, and death. Their ideas were not designed to impress. They were designed to withstand pressure. Take Cato the Younger. In a world ruled by ambition and flattery, Cato chose integrity. He spoke plainly in the Roman Senate, refused bribes, resisted corruption, and openly defied Julius Caesar when others stayed silent to protect their positions. He was not admired for this. He was mocked, targeted, and ultimately cornered. But he never surrendered his principles. Even when it cost him everything, including his life, he refused to betray what he believed. Cato didn't seek martyrdom. He wasn't trying to be a symbol. He simply believed that virtue was not negotiable. He would not kneel to power that lacked principle. He would not trade peace of mind for public safety. And because of that, his name has outlived emperors. The world may not have applauded him in his time, but it remembers him now not for his victories, but for his values. Musonius Rufus, another Stoic, lived through exile not once, but multiple times. He was not driven from Rome for violence or rebellion. He was removed because his teachings empowered others to think independently, to resist corruption, and to act with self-discipline in a world that rewarded excess. He believed philosophy belonged to everyone, not just the elite. He trained women in Stoic principles, a radical move at the time, and insisted that virtue was not limited by gender or class. Musonius never tried to gain favor. He taught because it was right, not because it was popular. When the empire silenced him, he kept teaching. When comfort was offered at the cost of his principles, he declined. He lived simply, spoke truthfully, and influenced generations, not through power, but through consistency. Then there is Epictetus. Born a slave, he gained freedom and later became one of the most influential Stoic teachers in history. He didn't inherit wealth. He didn't seek a grand platform. His authority came from how he lived. He taught that no one can take your freedom if you refuse to surrender your mind. That dignity is not something you're given. It's something you choose in every situation, especially when it's hard. Epictetus didn't teach theory. He taught practice, and that practice often involved being seen as strange, difficult, or even foolish by the crowd. But he understood something most never learn. Popularity is shallow currency. It inflates easily, it collapses quickly, and it is almost always shaped by fear. The Stoics rejected that fear. They knew the price of standing alone, but they paid it anyway. Because what they gained in return was something priceless, the ability to look in the mirror and know they had not betrayed themselves. Their stories remind us that the pursuit of approval always comes with strings. The crowd is not stable. Its love is conditional. Its praise is selective. And if you build your life trying to stay in its favor, you will spend your days shifting, explaining, adjusting, until nothing solid remains. But if you choose principle over performance, you build something else. Something that lasts longer than applause. Something that outlives judgment. You don't have to be in exile to understand this. The same choice appears in daily life. When you stay quiet while others gossip. When you hold your boundary even when it upsets someone. When you tell the truth that no one wants to hear. These are the modern equivalents of Stoic courage. Small moments that test whether you'll protect your comfort or your character. And it won't always be dramatic. Often it will be subtle. An invitation to speak when you know silence is wiser. A pressure to agree when your instinct says no. A choice to look the other way when your values say act. In each moment, the same question will appear. Will you fold to be liked or stand to be honest? The Stoics teach us that the crowd cannot be your compass. Not because the crowd is evil, but because it's unstable. It moves based on fear, emotion, trends, and noise. And if you follow it, you'll never stand still long enough to hear your own voice. Dignity means walking your path, even when it costs you visibility, even when it earns you criticism, even when those around you call your stillness weakness, your silence arrogance, your honesty trouble. You don't correct them to protect your image. You simply stay true to your code, because you know that time tests everything, and dignity always outlasts popularity. You also stop judging your values by how many people agree with them. A lonely truth is still truth. A quiet choice can still be right. A path walked alone is not proof of error, it's proof of courage. And when that path is walked from principle, not pride, it becomes powerful. The historical Stoics didn't crave approval. They didn't fear rejection. They feared only one thing, becoming untrue to themselves. That was their line, and when they reached it, they stood still. Today, we're surrounded by voices telling us to grow our platforms, shape our image, maximize our appeal. But the Stoics remind us that the most powerful reputation is the one you have with yourself. What good is applause if you had to abandon yourself to get it? Real strength is found in walking away from popularity that demands your silence, in rejecting attention that rewards dishonesty, in choosing a quiet life over a performative one. Because only in that quiet do you find clarity. Only in that rejection do you find peace. You won't always be thanked for this. You may not even be understood, but you'll be free. And in the rare moments when someone sees you clearly and respects you for your stance, it will mean more than 1,000 shallow compliments. So walk like Cato, teach like Musonius, endure like Epictetus, and live in a way that doesn't chase the crowd, but makes the crowd rethink what it chases. That is the weight of a Stoic life. Not popular, but permanent. After seeing how history remembers those who chose dignity over popularity, you begin to notice something deeper in their example. They didn't need to perform strength. They simply lived it. They didn't posture, demand attention, or try to prove themselves. And yet, people followed. People listened. People remembered. That's not charisma. That's not persuasion. That's something else entirely. It's confidence, but not the kind most are taught to chase. Real confidence doesn't try to be noticed. It doesn't need to declare itself. It doesn't show up loudly. It simply exists, calm, centered, and quietly unshakable. And because it doesn't depend on external validation, it cannot be taken away by silence, doubt, or rejection. It is the rare kind of strength that moves without the need to be seen. The most misunderstood part of confidence is that it cannot be proven. People often try to display it with volume, with certainty, with dominance. But the moment you're trying to show you're confident, you're no longer grounded in it. Because proof implies doubt. Real confidence doesn't seek to be believed. It simply acts. You know it when you feel it in someone. It's in their posture, their pace, their tone. It's in their lack of urgency. It's in the way they make decisions without narrating them. It's in how they respond to challenge, not with overcompensation, but with stillness. You can't always describe it, but you never miss it. Stoicism teaches that confidence is not a personality trait. It's a byproduct. It grows from integrity, clarity, and self-command. It is the result of knowing what you stand for and living in line with it over time. When you act from that place long enough, you stop needing applause or proof. You stop chasing certainty in others' eyes. You start to live in a way that needs no explanation. People confuse confidence with certainty, but real confidence can exist even with doubt. It doesn't mean you know everything. It means you trust yourself to face what comes, without panic. You're not rattled by uncertainty because you've stopped trying to control every outcome. You've made peace with discomfort. You've built enough internal structure to stay composed even when everything else shifts. This kind of confidence isn't about thinking you're better than others. It's about knowing you no longer need to compare. You've stepped off the scoreboard. You've stopped trying to win a game no one really understands. Confidence is not, "I'll succeed at everything." It's, "I will remain myself no matter what happens." When you meet someone who radiates this, they don't need attention. They don't chase recognition. They don't change their tone depending on who's watching. They don't inflate when praised or shrink when criticized. They're not the loudest voice in the room, but they're often the one that carries the most weight. This kind of presence is earned, not built overnight. It's forged through discipline, honesty, and failure. Every time you keep your word, you strengthen it. Every time you tell the truth when silence is safer, you deepen it. Every time you walk away from what's easy but misaligned, you feed it. And little by little, that confidence becomes your baseline. You don't have to announce it. In fact, the moment you do, it starts to fade. Because what you're really saying is, please see this in me. But when it's real, that need disappears. You don't walk into rooms hoping to impress. You walk in aware of your presence, not shaped by how it's received. You know that respect comes not from volume, but from depth. You also stop trying to predict how people will respond to you, because your confidence is not for them, it's for you. It's what keeps you steady when plans break, when people misunderstand you, when results don't come, when you're alone and still know your value. Confidence lives in those quiet, unseen moments when no one is clapping, but you keep showing up with the same intention. That's why it cannot be proven, because what others see is only the surface. They see how you hold eye contact, how you listen without rushing to speak, how you let go of attention without bitterness. But they don't see the years of choices behind it. They don't see the nights you trained your mind not to panic, the work you did in silence, the discipline you built in private. That's why real confidence is quiet, not because it lacks power, but because it no longer needs to display it. You don't get this by reading quotes or standing in front of mirrors reciting affirmations. You get this by choosing truth over approval, clarity over performance, integrity over reward. Again and again, until the need to prove anything disappears. This also changes how you treat others. Confident people don't compete in every conversation. They don't correct others to feel superior. They don't dominate. They don't seek to always be the center. Because when you're secure, you no longer need to show it. And ironically, that makes people listen even more. In relationships, this confidence builds trust. You're not unpredictable. You don't chase praise or panic at silence. You don't overpromise. You say less but mean more. You don't beg to be seen. You allow others the space to show up fully because your own presence isn't a performance. And this is where confidence and humility meet. True confidence doesn't make you louder. It makes you more grounded. It removes the urge to interrupt, to impress, to seek attention. You become a steady presence, not because you know everything, but because you're no longer afraid of being wrong. You're open to growth without seeing it as weakness. That's what makes this form of confidence so rare. Most people are taught that confidence must be seen to be believed, but the Stoic knows that confidence lives in how you act when no one is watching, in how you carry yourself when everything is uncertain, in how you return to your principles even when they cost you ease or attention. And when you live this way, something subtle happens. Others begin to trust you, not because of what you say, but because of what you don't say. Not because of your certainty, but because of your steadiness. They feel your presence not through performance, but through peace. You don't need to prove anything, because confidence isn't something you wear, it's something you are. It's the quiet result of a life aligned, a mind trained, a soul not for sale. And once you have it, you don't have to talk about it. You just live, and let the rest speak for itself. Once you stop trying to prove confidence, it becomes something others sense without effort. The less you try to show it, the more real it becomes. And from that quiet assurance comes the next form of power, not found in louder declarations, but in fewer words. Not in what you say, but in how often you choose not to. The shift is subtle, but it changes everything. The discipline of speaking less is not about silence for its own sake. It is about clarity. It is about presence. It is about restraint. In a world where noise is constant and opinions are thrown like weapons, the ability to pause, to speak only what is essential, has become rare, and that rarity commands respect. The Stoics believed that every word had weight. If it did not serve a purpose, it did not belong. They warned against speaking from ego, from impulse, from the need to be heard. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself often that many things can be said, but few need to be. Epictetus taught that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, because listening should double speaking. Today, people speak not just to connect, but to manage perception. Many talk to fill silence, to ease discomfort, to appear knowledgeable. But the more you say, the more you risk diluting your presence. Words that are frequent lose gravity. Opinions that are constant begin to blend. In contrast, the person who speaks less, but with intent, stands out without trying to. Speaking less does not mean suppressing your thoughts. It means choosing them. It means knowing that not every thought needs to become a sound. It means learning that pauses are not gaps to be filled, but spaces where clarity can breathe. The person who can sit in silence, who can resist the need to explain, often holds the most control in a room. This practice sharpens your influence. When you speak only when something matters, your words carry more force. Others begin to listen more closely because they know you don't speak to hear yourself. They know your words weren't chosen casually. Your presence becomes a signal of depth, not of performance. In conversations, this creates balance. You're no longer waiting for your turn to speak. You're listening with intention. You're reading more than just words. You're watching tone, timing, energy. And when you respond, you offer what's needed, not what's automatic. You're not reacting to fill space. You're responding to bring substance. This form of speech doesn't shout. It cuts through, not with volume, but with precision. It also makes your boundaries stronger. When you stop over-explaining, over-apologizing, and over-justifying, you communicate that your clarity is not up for discussion, that your decisions are final, that you are not speaking to gain approval, but to inform. People feel this. They adjust, not because you forced them, but because your silence left no room for negotiation. The discipline of speaking less also quiets your internal world. You no longer replay every sentence. You no longer wonder if you said too much. You no longer chase the perfect response to feel in control. You make peace with saying enough. You learn to stop when the point is made. This doesn't mean you withhold truth. It means you deliver it with care. Speaking less is not avoidance. It is intention. It means you wait until you're calm before speaking hard truths. It means you let silence do its part in communication. It means you allow others to speak fully before offering your view. When you adopt this habit, you begin to notice how many words are unnecessary, how much time is spent on proving, defending, pleasing. You start to recognize how often conversation becomes competition. But you're no longer pulled into that. You're not there to win, you're there to add value. And if nothing valuable needs to be said, you say nothing. This makes you unpredictable in a good way. You no longer follow patterns that others expect. You're not quick to react. You don't make assumptions aloud. You don't rush to give your opinion. People notice this, and over time, they begin to ask with more care. They pay more attention. Not because you demanded it, but because you've shown that your attention is not given casually. Speaking less also builds your emotional control. The pause between thought and word becomes your ally. You feel anger, but you wait. You feel pressure, but you breathe. You feel insulted, but you respond slowly. That space between feeling and speaking is where you reclaim your power. You no longer speak to manage how others see you. You speak to stay true to how you see yourself. In leadership, this becomes a signature. People follow those whose words are rare and precise. Because those words feel earned. They carry substance. They don't perform, they reveal. The leader who speaks less and means more is often the one remembered. In relationships, speaking less deepens trust. It shows you don't need to fill every silence. You're not trying to prove your role. You're not overcompensating. You listen. You choose your timing. You don't interrupt. You don't flood others with your emotions. You share when ready, with care, not urgency. This practice also strengthens solitude. You no longer need conversation to feel connected. You find connection in your presence. You observe more. You think clearly. You hear your own thoughts with less noise. You learn to feel comfortable in your own silence, and that comfort is what allows you to show up with clarity when it's time to speak again. You will also see how this discipline creates contrast. In noisy environments, your stillness speaks volumes. While others race to be heard, you wait. While others speak in defense, you stay grounded. While others seek to be understood, you remain aligned. You no longer measure your impact by how much you say. You measure it by how fully you mean it. This shift isn't always easy. In moments of tension, your first instinct may still be to fill space, to justify, to explain, to soften. But the more you practice holding the silence, the more you realize it holds you. You don't lose connection by speaking less. You deepen it. And eventually, your words begin to carry a different weight. Not because you planned them, but because they came from a place that didn't need to be heard, just needed to be true. This is the discipline of speaking less, not an absence of voice, but the presence of depth, not withholding truth, but honoring its value, not silence for silence's sake, but silence as a foundation for clarity, strength, and respect. Once you begin to speak less and only when it matters, your presence shifts. Words no longer scatter your power. They carry it. You stop trying to win attention with volume and instead gain trust through quiet certainty. But with that shift comes a deeper question. Can you hold this presence without needing to control others? Can you earn respect without dominating, persuading, or manipulating? This is where real strength is tested, not in how loudly you lead, but in how little you force. Most people confuse authority with control. They believe that in order to be respected, they must appear superior. They believe leadership is about being right, being louder, being above. But lasting respect doesn't come from pressure. It comes from something quieter: integrity, humility, and steadiness. Respect built on fear fades when the fear goes away, but respect built on character deepens with time. The Stoics never chased dominance. They didn't seek power to control others. They focused on mastering themselves. They believed that the only real authority you have is over your own choices, and that any external influence must grow from internal alignment. They did not teach people through intimidation. They led by example. Dominance is temporary. It relies on force, whether physical, emotional, or social. It can get people to comply, but it rarely earns their true loyalty. People may follow out of obligation or fear, but not out of trust. And the moment your control slips, so does their cooperation. The stronger your grip, the more fragile your influence. Respect without dominance, however, is built differently. It starts with composure, the ability to remain calm in conflict, the capacity to stay grounded when others are reactive. When you don't need to win every debate or prove every point, people begin to trust your restraint. They feel safe in your presence, not because you're passive, but because you're not volatile. That composure is not about repressing emotions. It's about responding instead of reacting. It's about knowing what's worth your energy and letting go of the rest. It's about staying anchored in your principles, even when others are trying to pull you off balance. That calm creates space. It changes the pace of the room, and over time, people begin to look to you not because you demand it, but because your presence gives clarity. Then comes humility. Real humility is not weakness. It's confidence without ego. It's knowing your value without needing to advertise it. It's admitting mistakes without collapsing into shame. It's allowing others to shine without feeling threatened. When people see you own your flaws and remain steady, they feel permission to do the same. That honesty builds connection. That connection builds trust. Humility allows you to listen fully. You're not planning your response while someone else speaks. You're not waiting to correct them. You're not leading with assumptions. You're there to understand. And when people feel understood, they begin to open up. They begin to respect not just your knowledge, but your presence. Integrity holds it all together. Without it, composure becomes image. Humility becomes performance. But when you say what you mean, keep your word, live your values, and admit when you fall short, your actions begin to carry weight. People may not agree with you, but they will trust you. They know where you stand. They know you won't shift based on convenience. Respect that grows from integrity is earned slowly. It doesn't come from titles, charisma, or strategy. It comes from years of showing up in the same way, regardless of who's watching. It comes from being reliable in chaos and graceful in stability. It comes from not needing to be right in order to stay rooted. This kind of leadership doesn't seek followers. It seeks alignment. You don't try to control how others see you. You focus on controlling how you show up. And when people begin to follow that example, they do it by choice, not because they were pushed, but because they were moved. You can see this play out in all areas of life. In workplaces, the manager who micromanages might get compliance, but rarely inspires. The one who leads with consistency, fairness, and clear expectations becomes someone people want to work with, not just work for. In families, the parent who dominates might gain obedience, but often loses connection. The one who listens, explains, and models calm strength earns influence that lasts. This doesn't mean you allow disrespect. Respect without dominance still holds boundaries. You can say no firmly. You can stand your ground. But you don't do it to win. You do it because your values are not up for negotiation. And when people see that you don't move your lines based on moods, they begin to trust your stability. You also stop trying to compete. You don't need to prove you're the smartest, strongest, or most successful. You lead by letting others rise, not by keeping them small. That generosity doesn't make you smaller, it makes you solid. People are drawn to those who don't need to dominate to feel secure. Over time, this way of being builds something rare, a reputation that stands without force, a presence that earns respect without asking for it, and a leadership style that invites, not commands, others to rise with you. You can practice this by noticing where you try to control. When someone disagrees, do you lean in with curiosity or defense? When someone shines, do you celebrate or compare? When a conversation gets tense, Do you escalate or stay grounded? Each moment becomes a chance to choose influence over pressure, depth over display. You also learn to let go of the need to be validated. Respect earned without dominance means you may not always be seen, but that's the point. You are no longer acting to be approved, you are acting to be aligned. And those who notice will be drawn not to your image, but to your core. Eventually, people begin to ask for your opinion, not because you insist, but because you wait. They trust your silence more than others' speeches. They trust your presence more than others' performance. And you don't have to tell them why. You've shown them. This is what the Stoics meant by strength through virtue. A life that doesn't rely on power plays, manipulation, or control to gain respect, but builds it quietly, steadily, through character. In a world trained to reward dominance, this is a different kind of leadership. It doesn't crush, it elevates. It doesn't fear silence. It trusts its own gravity. It doesn't manipulate. It listens, stands firm, and walks forward, with or without applause. Because the goal is not to be obeyed. The goal is to be whole. And from that wholeness, to lead by example, not by pressure, but by presence. When you lead without dominance, when your presence speaks louder than force, and when your actions stay rooted without needing control, you begin to uncover a more personal challenge. Even after all the restraint, the composure, and the clarity, there's still a tension left. It shows up quietly, often after the conversation ends or after you've walked away from a situation. It asks a single question that can shake everything. Did they understand me? This is where the approval-seeking mind makes its final stand, not in loud validation, but in the desire to be correctly seen. There is a powerful need most people carry, to be understood, to feel that others know your heart, see your intentions, recognize your truth. And when that understanding doesn't come, it can feel like a form of rejection. But what if real freedom begins not in being understood, but in letting go of the need for it? The courage to be misunderstood is one of the hardest forms of internal strength. It's not about becoming distant or dismissive. It's not about pretending that disconnection doesn't hurt. It's about seeing clearly that being misunderstood is often unavoidable and choosing not to let it define you. The Stoics understood this deeply. They did not shape their lives around reputation. They acted from principle, even when the world misread their silence as pride, their restraint as weakness, their honesty as offense. They did not waste time correcting every misperception. They knew that clarity with oneself was more valuable than clarity in everyone's eyes. When you're driven by the need to be understood, you live in reaction. You filter your words. You soften your truth. You manage your image. You over-explain, over-defend, overcompensate. You begin shaping your life not based on what is right, but on what will be received the right way. And without realizing it, you lose your freedom. Being misunderstood does not mean you've failed. It means you've chosen clarity over performance. It means you've stopped shaping yourself to match the lens others use to view the world. Everyone sees through their own filters, their pain, their assumptions, their stories. You are not responsible for adjusting your soul to fit those narratives. There will be times when your silence will be called arrogance. Your distance will be read as disapproval. Your boundaries will be labeled selfish. Your truth will be distorted through someone else's fear. You can spend your life chasing correction, or you can breathe, step back, and remember that your peace is not built on their agreement. This doesn't mean you refuse to communicate or that you shut down connection. It means you understand the limit of your responsibility. You can speak with honesty, You can act with clarity. You can show your values through consistent behavior. But beyond that, how others receive you is their work, not yours. Letting go of the need to be fully understood is a form of release. It doesn't harden you. It softens your attachment. You stop needing to be seen as good to feel whole. You stop needing to be perceived as right to remain steady. You stop needing others to get it in order to stay clear about who you are. When you embrace this mindset, you also begin to forgive faster. You stop holding grudges over misinterpretations. You no longer waste time crafting the perfect explanation that will finally make them see. You stop clinging to the idea that understanding equals validation. And in that space, energy returns. You start using it to live, not to convince. You also begin to speak differently. Your words become simpler, not because you're withholding, but because you no longer carry the pressure to be perfectly understood. You share what matters. You let silence do the rest. You accept that sometimes people will not see the full picture, and that's okay. This kind of inner detachment sharpens your focus. You stop getting caught in side arguments. You stop repeating yourself to people who are listening only to respond. You stop spinning in the loop of explanation. And what's left is stillness, the kind that can't be shaken by misunderstanding. The fear of being misunderstood often comes from the desire to be loved for who you really are. But the irony is that bending yourself to be better understood often hides who you really are. It replaces truth with performance, and in doing so, it drives the very connection you crave further away. You don't need to be understood to be true. You don't need to be agreed with to be valid. You don't need to be perfectly seen to be whole. Those things are beautiful when they happen, but your identity cannot be built on them. You can love people who don't fully get you. You can release relationships that depended on you being someone else. You can walk away from conversations where your truth was reduced to someone else's discomfort. That is not cruelty. That is self-respect. And over time, something powerful begins to happen. You stop fearing rejection that comes from misperception. You stop defending your tone, your distance, your choices. You stop trying to edit yourself into palatability. And you begin to attract people who are more aligned. Those who do see you, not because you shaped yourself to be seen, but because they are ready to meet you as you are. This is not easy. The urge to explain, to clarify, to fix perception will still arise. But now you meet that urge with patience. You ask, is this about connection or about control? And when it's control, you let it go. That's where your freedom sharpens. The courage to be misunderstood is not about isolation. It's about alignment. It's about walking your path even when others talk. It's about telling the truth even when it's inconvenient. It's about holding your ground even when others don't applaud. And it's about choosing your peace over their perfect picture of you, because their picture is not your problem, and your freedom was never meant to be filtered. Once you stop chasing the need to be fully understood, something important becomes clear. You realize that being truly known is not always something that happens through words. It often happens through action, through what you build, what you maintain, and what you quietly commit to over time. When you no longer shape your identity around being seen correctly, you begin to focus on something far more durable, the work itself. This is where your energy goes when it's no longer spent explaining, into your craft, into the discipline of doing something with care, precision, and consistency, not to gain attention, but to express integrity. Because there's a kind of respect that cannot be begged for or won through personality. It's the respect that grows from the work you do when no one is watching. In a culture obsessed with performance, with image, with being noticed, the Stoic path leads in the opposite direction. It teaches that the most powerful form of influence is not noise, it is excellence. Not temporary recognition, but earned credibility. The Stoics believed that your actions should speak clearly on your behalf, that the quality of your work says more about your character than any explanation or applause ever could. True respect isn't gained by charisma. It's built through consistency. You don't have to dominate conversations or impress with style if you show up every day and produce work that holds its own weight. The quiet kind of excellence, the kind that grows slowly and proves itself through results, lasts longer than any praise. Your craft, whatever it is, becomes a reflection of your values, not in words, but in design, in finish, in effort. It becomes a signal that you care not just about being seen, but about doing something right. And over time, this attitude creates depth. People may not remember every opinion you had, but they will remember how you showed up to your work, how you gave your best even when it wasn't noticed, how you refined your skills not to show off, but because you believed in doing things properly. This mindset requires patience. You must let go of the quick dopamine hit of praise. You must stop measuring your worth by how quickly others recognize it. You learn to trust that over time, quality speaks, that real value accumulates, that the people who matter, those who look deeper than surface, will notice not because you asked them to, but because your work made it impossible to ignore. Craft is the great equalizer. It doesn't care about charm or status. It doesn't respond to shortcuts. It reflects only what you've put in: discipline, humility, attention to detail. And when done with intention, it becomes a kind of quiet legacy. You don't need to talk about your commitment. Your work reveals it. This way of living also simplifies everything. You don't need to chase the next trend. You don't need to manufacture a brand around yourself. You focus on making something that's real. You stay close to the process. You improve your skill. You get better because you show up. That's where pride lives, not in the spotlight, but in the daily repetition of effort done well. The Stoics believed that your best self is revealed through repeated action, not through high moments of success, but through showing up when it's boring, thankless, or hard. They saw mastery not as a destination, but as a practice, something refined over years, in silence. It was never about proving you were excellent. It was about becoming someone who does excellent things because that's who you've chosen to be. This removes the pressure to market yourself. You don't need to keep explaining what you're doing or why. You just do it. You focus on what's in front of you and you build it with care. The results speak in time. This protects your energy. You're not pulled by comparison. You're anchored in what you're building. You also stop needing others to motivate you. You don't need constant encouragement to keep working. Your standards become internal. You care because it matters to you, not because someone claps. This internal orientation builds freedom. You no longer live at the mercy of praise. You live by rhythm, by process, by your own code. And when your focus is on craft, you begin to notice how much noise surrounds those who lack it. Loud promises, exaggerated claims, empty brilliance. It shines for a moment, then fades. But the quiet doers, the ones who show up day after day, become the people others look to in moments of crisis, in moments of need, in moments when real skill matters more than image. You can feel the difference between someone who knows what they're doing and someone who's pretending. The first doesn't need to convince. Their work does the speaking, and that speaking has gravity. It's not slick or attention-seeking. It simply exists, unshakable. Choosing excellence over attention also protects your integrity. You don't need to compromise your values to stand out. You don't need to chase empty metrics to feel successful. You define success by how well your work reflects your principles. That alignment brings peace. Even if few notice it, you know what you're building and why. This approach also helps you endure failure, because when your goal is to improve, not impress, a mistake is not humiliation. It's information. It's fuel. You learn, you adjust, and you continue. You're not trying to be perfect. You're trying to be better. That makes your work more honest, more resilient, and ultimately more valuable. Craft over attention also builds stronger relationships. People begin to associate you with reliability, with detail, with care. You become someone others can trust, not because you say so, but because you've proven it, project by project, word by word, action by action. This doesn't mean you hide your work. It means you release the need to wrap it in constant promotion. You let your results carry the weight. You let your impact create the message. You trust that those who recognize quality will see it in time, and if they don't, your path remains unchanged. The result is a quieter, stronger kind of confidence. You don't inflate your image to match others' expectations. You let your work be the message. You let it represent who you are, focused, present, committed. You don't chase moments. You build something that lasts beyond them. Respect through craft is not fast, it's not loud, but it's real, and it can't be faked. Every detail carries your fingerprints. Every result reflects your attention. Every step becomes part of a path that speaks for you long after the noise has passed. You may never trend, you may never be widely known, but you'll be deeply known by the people who matter and by the work that stands in your name. Not because you demanded recognition, but because you built something worthy of it. You've just walked through a different kind of path, a Stoic path, not built on shouting for attention or begging for applause, but on something deeper, quiet strength, calm clarity, and earned respect. You've seen how approval addiction disguises itself in politeness, people-pleasing, self-doubt, and the fear of being misunderstood. You've learned how to step back from performance, let go of internal debate, and stop explaining yourself to be liked. You've seen how real presence doesn't require force, and how the world eventually bends to those who live with silent consistency and visible integrity. Respect is not something you chase, it's something you stand in. It's built not on trying to be seen a certain way, but on living a certain way, through discipline, humility, clear boundaries, and relentless attention to what you build when no one's watching. And the deepest respect? It's the one you hold for yourself. Now the question is yours. Are you ready to stop seeking approval and start commanding respect? On your terms, by your values, in your time? Leave a comment below and write, "I choose self-respect over approval." Not just for the algorithm, but for yourself. Let it be your first small declaration of a new standard. And if this message spoke to something inside you, subscribe to the channel for more content like this. No noise, no fluff, just tools, truth, and timeless wisdom to help you live stronger and quieter. Until next time, stay grounded, live with purpose, and carry your strength in silence.